Chapter 1. Regaining Life. Wang Yu walked slowly across a rundown farm, a threadbare backpack sagging from one shoulder. His fingertips trailed through the waist-high weeds as he took in the familiar, rusty smell of old wood and damp earth. It had been only a day since he woke up in this body, and he was still letting the memories settle into place. The body he now inhabited had once belonged to a boy named Xiaoyu. Like countless children who grew up watching the anime, Xiaoyu had dreamed of becoming a Pokémon trainer. When he was 10, he'd packed a small bag and set out to chase that dream. Wang Yu could see it all as if he'd lived it, the bright-eyed determination, the long road, the years of slow progress. For 10 years, Xiaoyu tried and tried, but talent didn't follow. Despite coming from a comfortable family, he never became more than a middling trainer. In the end, he returned home, released most of his Pokémon, and kept only one companion who refused to leave, a loyal Bulbasaur. Those scraps of a former life fit awkwardly into the life Wang Yu remembered before the rebirth. Before all this, he had been an office worker, a supervisor who knew how to talk but not how to lead. He pushed problems down to the people under him, took the credit when things went well, and let others shoulder the blame when they failed. He had been used and manipulated, a living example of everything that had gone wrong in his career. Once, half joking, someone had asked him where he would want to be reborn. Without thinking, he'd said, "Of course I'd go to the world of Pokémon." Now the joke had become reality. The farmhouse around him, the name stitched into the boy's old clothes, and the small green dinosaur trudging at his side were all proof that chance or fate had given him another shot. Wang Yu closed his eyes for a moment and felt the weight of both lives settling on his shoulders, the bitter lessons from his office years and the stubborn, unfinished dream of the boy whose name he wore. He put a hand on Bulbasaur's head. The Pokémon looked up at him with steady, untroubled eyes, tail swaying gently. That mute faith was worth more than a dozen job titles. Wang Yu swallowed and let himself smile for the first time in a long while. If this was a second chance, he didn't intend to waste it. Even if I never become a real trainer, I'd be happy just seeing those cute Pokémon every day. It had been a throwaway joke in his previous life, and impossibly, it had come true. Wang Yu found himself here with a system, though system felt generous. It didn't even have a proper name. All it could do was show the skills he'd supposedly learned. The interface was half-baked, 2 lines in clunky English, like a programmer had rushed a prototype online. Intermediate trainer, intermediate traveler, only he could see the screen. The skill names were scrambled. The whole thing looked like cheap, unfinished software. There weren't any basic stats, no numbers for strength or experience, nothing to quantify his progress. Wang Yu closed his eyes, gave a wry, bitter smile, and forced himself to let go of the disappointment. He still had hope. In this strange new world, there had to be a way to find value and maybe a little happiness. He opened his eyes and let his gaze fall back to the small farm in front of him. It had belonged to Xiaoyu's grandfather. Xiaoyu's parents had been forest rangers for the Alliance and had been killed in an elf riot years ago, leaving the child and her aged grandfather to rely on one another. Now the old man had died of illness, and the little farm, and Xiaoyu's future, rested on fragile shoulders. Although Dagayu had come from another time, he still felt the emotions of his original life, guilt and self-reproach weighing on him. "From now on, I'll live well for you," he murmured, resolve hardening his voice. A call came from down the lane. "Xiaoyu! Xiaoyu!" He looked up to see a well-to-do old man dismounting a sturdy horse named Kentaro, smiling as he walked toward him. It was Grandpa Fujian, a long-time free, end of Xiaoyu's grandfather. "Grandpa Fujian!" Dagayu stepped forward and hugged him warmly. "You've grown, stronger," Grandpa Fujian said, patting his shoulder with obvious pride. "It's good to have you back." He sighed. For a moment his face clouded with something unspoken, then smoothed out again. "Now that you're home, take good care of this farm. It's not large, but it has everything you need. Your grandfather and I were good friends. Look after the place. If you need my help, just come to me anytime." Warmth flooded Dagayu's chest. He bowed slightly and said sincerely, "Thank you, Grandpa Fujian." Grandpa Fujian seemed to remember something. He walked back to the Kentaro, unloaded a few tools and supplies, and told Dagayu, This will do for today. I'll head back for more tools and come help you sort everything out later." Then he swung onto the Kintaro and rode away. Daguyu watched his retreating figure, gratitude filling him. He took out a Pokéball. A red light flashed, and a Bulbasaur popped out, immediately throwing itself into his arms and nuzzling him affectionately. Daguyu stroked its smooth little head. "Bulbasaur, please take good care of me from now on," he asked. Bulbasaur chirped happily. It didn't really understand why Daguyu had asked, but it felt gentler toward him all the same. "All right, we'd better hurry if we don't want to have to camp out tonight," Daguyu said, rolling up his sleeves. "Bulbasaur." Bulbasaur echoed enthusiastically, and they set to work. "Let's start by clearing the weeds in front of the house, Bulbasaur. Let's have a contest. Whoever pulls the most wins." Daguyu dove into the dirt and started yanking at the weeds. Bulbasaur cocked its head, puzzled for a moment. "Dani?" Then immediately sprang into action, using its vine-like tendrils to tug at the roots. "Dani! Danai!" Daguyu laughed. "Hey, no fair! You're cheating, Bulbasaur!" "Ha ha!" Daguyu crowed while pulling. "Keep at it, Bulbasaur. I'm way faster than you." "Dani! Danai!" Bulbasaur protested stubbornly, refusing to give up. Time flew by. The two of them worked until the front yard was cleared, all the way to the old, rickety fence gate. But there were still too many stubborn patches. Some roots were buried deep in the soil. Daguyu could wrench out the shallow ones, but he couldn't budge the deeply rooted weeds. In the end, Bulbasaur had to finish the hardest work. Of course, the contest's result was inevitable. Daguyu lost. How could a human possibly beat a Pokémon at pulling weeds? They sat back to rest for a moment when Grandpa Fujian returned. Riding 2 Kentaros, he was hauling crates and bundles of tools and supplies. Daguyu and Bulbasaur hurried over to help unload. Grandpa Fujian surveyed the cleared patch of ground in front of him, then nodded in satisfaction. "Not bad. We cleared this quickly," he said, and began unloading supplies that Kentaro had brought. "These are 3 months' worth of food. They should see you through until the new crops come in. After that, you'll be self-sufficient. And here are some toiletries and bedding," he told Xiaoyu as he set the things down. "Thank you so much," Otani and Bulbasaur said, bowing deeply to show their gratitude. Fujian helped Xiaoyu to his feet and added, "Xiaoyu, your grandfather missed you." Xiaoyu lowered his head, ashamed. Fujian laughed and patted him on the shoulder. "But it's all right. Chasing dreams is what every boy does. I was the same when I was young." "I'm glad you're back," he said. "Come on, let's clean up the room. If we don't, you and Bulbasaur will have to sleep outside tonight." Xiaoyu was quiet. Whatever he felt condensed into a single sigh. He took the cleaning tools and followed Fujian. With one more pair of hands, the room was tidied far faster than before. Fujian appeared in the doorway holding Kentaro. "I'll leave him with you," he said, handing Kentaro's Pokéball to Daguyu. Daguyu took the ball without a word. He still felt the weight of earlier remarks. Guilt sat heavy on his chest, but he refused to let it show. "Don't take what I said earlier to heart," Fujian added a little awkwardly. "I was just speaking honestly." "No, you didn't say anything wrong," Daguyu replied, tightening his grip on the Pokéball. "It's just, I feel guilty, but I've made up my mind. I'll stay here and take good care of Grandpa's favorite farm." "All right," Fujian laughed, relief obvious on his face. "Good. That makes me feel better. It's getting late. Come to my house for dinner tonight. Don't be so polite with me." He gave Daguyu a friendly tug toward the door. "I'll show you the way, so you can come by any time." Before long, they were mounted, Ken and Luo beneath them, and riding toward Fujian's place. Fujian's family ran a farm too, but much larger, a proper dairy farm. As they walked onto the property, a herd of cows lifted their heads and stared curiously, then let out welcoming moos. Fujian waved, and they answered with an affectionate smile. The farmhouse itself was a 2-story house, warm and cozy inside. As they stepped through the door, an elderly woman was at the stove, cooking lunch. I heard a noise and turned around. "Oh my, Xiaoyu, you've grown so much," came a delighted voice. "Grandma Shizi," I called back. "Sit down, lunch will be ready soon," she urged, pulling me into a chair and handing me a steaming cup of tea before hurrying off to the kitchen. I cradled Bulbasaur in my lap and sat quietly, a calm settling over me that I hadn't felt since I started working in my previous life. Grandpa Fujian leaned back, sipping his tea and smoking slowly, looking perfectly content. Lunch was ready before long, all home-cooked dishes, and because Grain Rain had just arrived, she'd added an extra meat dish to celebrate. Grandma Shizi fussed over me the whole time, piling my plate high, and she hadn't forgotten Bulbasaur. A big bowl of Pokémon food and a generous cup of Moo Moo milk were set out just for him. After we'd eaten our fill, Bulbasaur and I lazily lounged on the sofa for a while before heading to the kitchen to help wash up. I chatted happily with Grandma Shizi about some of the interesting things I'd seen on the trip, and Grandpa Fujian soon joined in, trading his own travel stories from when he was young. It was a warm, easy afternoon, the kind of hour when hosts and guests simply enjoy each other's company. After helping wash the dishes and tidy up, Grandma Shizi said her goodbyes and prepared to leave. Before she went, she pressed a large paper bag of freshly baked biscuits into Daguyu's hands. He couldn't refuse such kindness, so he accepted them gratefully. Once he'd mounted Kentaro and exchanged farewells with Fujian and Grandma Shizi, Daguyu went back out to the front of the house to tackle the weeds. He and Bulbasaur worked until dusk and only managed to clear about half the area. Locals called it a small farm, but compared to farms from his previous life, or even by the standards of the Pokémon world, this place felt enormous. From the house he couldn't see its edges. In a world where land was vast and people were sparse, what they called a small farm could easily be massive. When he was done for the night, he stowed his tools, boiled water, cooked a simple meal, and then bathed with Bulbasaur. After changing into pajamas, he made a bed on the first floor, curled up with Bulbasaur at his side, and fell into a deep, contented sleep. It felt good to be in the Pokémon world. Chapter 2. Everything is difficult at the beginning. The first rays of morning lit up Daguyu's farm, casting a warm glow over the patchwork of fields and buildings. Daguyu and Bulbasaur were up before dawn. There were too many tasks to waste the day. Besides pulling the weeds from in front of and behind the house, they needed to clear a plot next to the homestead for planting grains and vegetables. When Daguyu checked the system interface that morning, he noticed a new skill had been added: primary weed control. Encouraged, he and Bulbasaur set to work. They finished the yard first, then moved on to the cultivated field. Most of the weeds came up without much trouble. A few stubborn clumps put up a fight and had to be wrenched free, but together they made steady progress. By the time night fell, Daguyu was exhausted. He washed up, ate a quick meal, and collapsed into a deep sleep with Bulbasaur curled at his side. The next morning, they were at it again. After a long morning's labor, the plot was finally ready for planting. Kentaro showed up to help, though his contribution was mostly words of advice rather than muscle. He could only offer suggestions, not do the digging. Fujian came over too, and watched the two of them work with an amused, helpless expression. It felt slow and hard going, but the work was done, and that was what mattered. "You really are impossible," Grandpa Fujian said with a wry laugh. "Doesn't Bulbasaur have Leaf Blade?" Daguyu smacked his forehead. He'd almost forgotten he was in the Pokémon world. Once Fujian reminded him, he and Bulbasaur used Leaf Blade to slice away the surface weeds in no time. Kentaro helped pull up and pile the remaining roots, and the work suddenly moved a lot faster. Standing at the edge of the field, Daguyu looked over the large, newly cleared plot and felt a swell of pride. He lingered a while, admiring the handiwork he and the Pokémon had put in, then ate lunch and got back to it. That afternoon, under Grandpa Fujian's guidance, they planted grains and vegetables. Each crop went in its own bed and was marked with a wooden stake. Fujian explained the needs and characteristics of every plant as they worked, and Daguyu wrote everything down. He also noticed something else. His memory had sharpened. He was able to remember everything Fujian said after hearing it just once. Fujian noticed how quickly Daguyu was catching on and sped up the lessons, teaching as they worked. Before long, Daguyu had picked up the basic techniques for growing crops. A new entry appeared on his skill list: primary farming. If the system really does speed up learning like this, Daguyu thought, it could be a huge help. Even so, he found he preferred this life to being a trainer. It was busy, but it felt real and rewarding. At noon, Daguyu threw together a big batch of fried rice from simple ingredients. He and Fujian ate until they were full. He also packed a couple of plain but filling rations for Kentaro and Bulbasaur. They weren't fancy, but they would do for now. I'll get better supplies later, he promised himself. In the afternoon, Fujian rested at Wang Yu's place for a short while and then prepared to leave. Before he went, he gave Daguyu some practical advice. While waiting for the fields to mature, he could go fishing by the river and pick fruit from trees in the patches outside the forest to sell and boost the household income. Fujian said he'd get in touch with the local buyer and arrange for them to make a special trip out to Daguyu's farm. I thanked Grandpa Fujian again. He swung up onto Kentaro, gave me a friendly smile, and rode off without a second thought. I went to inspect the crops in the field. If Bulbasaur had the special move, Green Grass Field, it could have helped them grow. Too bad he didn't. I made a mental note to buy him a skill disc as soon as I had the money. After a careful check, confirmed everything was fine, I saddled up Kentaro, called Bulbasaur to my side, and prepared to head down to the river. I had never fished in Daguyu in my previous life, but with the system helping me in this one, learning shouldn't be hard. Still, standing by the riverbank and looking at the water, I realized I didn't even know where to begin. I decided to go ask Grandpa Fujian for some first-hand tips and the basics. I rode over to his house as quickly as I could. Fujian walked me through everything he knew, but he wasn't a full-time fisherman. He ran a rather large dairy farm and didn't have much time to fish. What he taught me were just the fundamentals, but that was exactly what I needed. I borrowed Grandpa Fujian's computer and spent hours online reading everything I could find about fishing. I took notes as I went, and when I got home, organized them so I could remember the important bits. Sure enough, basic fishing had popped up in my skill list. Before heading out, I borrowed a fishing rod from Grandpa Fujian and went down to the river to practice. We dug up a few wriggling earthworms from the damp soil for bait and settled in for a slow afternoon of fishing. I tried to follow the techniques I'd read about, adapting them to the local conditions. Different waters hold different species, the fish's preferred bait varies, and depth matters too. If you study it seriously, fishing turns into a pretty involved subject. Daguyu didn't care about all that theory, though. He was only interested in learning enough to help bring in some extra income for the family. After a long, patient afternoon, I finally managed to catch a medium-sized herring, perfect for dinner. Back home, I put the rod away and lent it to Wang Yu for the time being. Grandpa Fujian had originally intended to give the rod to Daguyu, but this time Daguyu said he didn't want it. In his previous life, he'd learned the hard way that adults need to understand how the world works. It's fine to accept help from others, but you can't rely on it forever. Push it too far, and even the best friendships will fray. Daguyu had decided that once he earned a little money, he'd buy some proper fishing gear and return Grandpa Fujian's rod. He was chopping vegetables for dinner when someone knocked at the door. When he opened it, a broad-shouldered young man stood there. He looked a bit older than Wang Yu. The man smiled and said, "Hello, I'm Dashi. I'm the buyer who handles purchases from Ponlin Town's farms." "Hello, I'm Daguyu," he replied. "I just came back from a trip and I recently inherited this farm." He returned the smile. Dashi laughed lightly. "Mr. Fujian told me about you. If you ever have anything to sell, just leave it in the purchase box by the gate and I'll pick it up. I come through here every day." "Thanks, that's very kind," Daguyu said, a little embarrassed. "But I don't really have anything to sell right now. Maybe just some freshwater fish." "That's all right," Dashi said reassuringly. "Things will pick up. If you're lucky and catch some rare fish, it could bring in a nice income. I won't bother you anymore. Bye." Dashi waved, left the farm, started his truck, and drove off. I closed the door and set about making dinner. Tonight's menu was simple: vegetables, fried rice, and a steaming bowl of fragrant fish soup. As I cooked, the basic cooking skill popped up in my skill column, another small confirmation that I was getting the hang of this life. I plated a little for Bulbasaur. He wasn't fond of meat, so I only gave him a taste of the fish. After wiping down and clearing away the two Pokemon's plates, I got ready for bed. I leaned against Kentaro with Bulbasaur cradled in my arms and felt a warm, quiet contentment. This life felt worth more than any treasure. After we said good night to one another, I fell asleep quickly. Bulbasaur used a vine to tug my blanket snug, let out a big yawn, wriggled until he found a comfortable spot in my arms, and dozed off as well. Chapter 3. The Joy of Fishing. When I woke that morning, I first went out to the fields to check the crops and pull a few fresh weeds. Once I was satisfied that everything was fine, I saddled Kentaro and rode down to the river to fish. I spent a little time scouting for a good spot, then set out a small stool, arranged my makeshift platform, and baited the hook. Bulbasaur and Kentaro watched me for a while, but quickly grew bored and wandered off to play nearby. Even though they hadn't been together long, those two had already become fast friends. I ignored them and settled in to fish. I'd learned the basics already and picked up plenty of practical know-how. I even had a few ideas about improving my technique that I wanted to test after finishing my chores. Everything was ready, so I cast the line with practiced ease. The hook kissed the water with a crisp plunk, leaving only the bobber to bob gently on the surface. Daguyu set his rod aside, pulled out the agricultural encyclopedia he'd borrowed from Grandpa Fujian, and began to read. Maybe it was the bait he'd prepared so carefully. Before long, the float gave a telltale twitch. He snapped the book shut and fixed his eyes on the bobber. When it plunged, he hauled on the line, putting all his weight into it. "Ha! Looks like I'm really lucky today. First catch is a big one," he crowed. Bulbasaur and Kentaro hurried over to cheer him on. For about 10 minutes, he battled the fish, letting it run and then reeling it back, until finally the creature in the water went limp. Seizing the moment, Daguyu pulled with everything he had. The fish broke the surface. Droplets flew into the air and glittered in the sunlight like scattered jewels. The fish lay flopping weakly on the bank, and Daguyu's grin lingered until he looked closely. Its eyes were blank and lifeless. It was a Magikarp, gasping and splashing uselessly in the mud. Daguyu's smile froze, then he shrugged inwardly. Well, at least he wasn't coming back empty-handed. I dropped the Magikarp into the creel, rebaited, and kept fishing. Soon the bites came one after another, just ordinary freshwater fish. None of them were huge, but there were so many that I barely had time to rest. I went through almost half my bait before I finally sat down to catch my breath. No sooner had I settled than my float vanished beneath the surface. Daguyu reacted instantly, snatching up the rod. The moment he had it, something enormous tore on the other end. The rod bent into a perfect U, and the force dragged him forward. He planted the butt of the rod on the ground and fell backward, straining against whatever was on the line. "Bulbasaur! Kentaro! Help! Bulba! Moo!" Bulbasaur and Kentaro came charging over. Together they fought the pull, and for more than half an hour the three of them kept the line taut in the water. Having those two Pokémon helping only fed Daguyu's excitement. The longer it went on, the more thrilled he became. "Push harder! I can feel it giving! Ta! Moo!" Daguyu and the two Pokémon he had with him strained together. A huge shape broke the surface with a spray of water that drenched them all. When the creature thudded onto the riverbank, Daguyu stared in disbelief. "It's a silver trout," he cried. "This is a rare freshwater fish. We could make a fortune." Then his face fell as his mind caught up. Wait, silver trout are protected. The thought of being caught with a protected species hit him cold. If the authorities found out, he could be looking at years behind bars. He needed advice, and there was only one person he trusted for situations like this. Fujian. "Get Grandpa Fujian," Daguyu said urgently. "Kentaro, go fetch him." Not long after, Kentaro came galloping up, Grandpa Fujian perched solidly on his back. Despite his age, Fujian sat steady like an old hand in the saddle. He clearly knew how to ride. Fujian climbed down and rushed forward, eyes wide with excitement. "Wow, what a silver trout! Xiaoyu, you are so lucky. I've lived a long time, and I've never seen one this big." "Grandpa Fujian," Daguyu cut in, trying to keep his voice level. "Now is not the time to talk about this. Silver trout are an endangered species. Shall I call Miss Junsha?" Daguyu asked with a half-smile. Yes, please." Fujian fished her phone out and called the station. Not long after, Miss Junsha from Panlin Town arrived with a large transport tank and 4 young assistants. Together, they lifted the fish into the tank and carefully filled it with water from the river. "Thank you so much for rescuing this endangered species in time, Mr. Otani and Grandpa Fujian," Miss Junsha said, grinning from ear to ear. Protecting a rare animal was a significant achievement, and she was clearly pleased. I've already reported this to my superiors. A generous reward for wildlife protection will be issued in due course. Ha ha ha! This was all Xiaoyu. Grandpa Fujian cut in before she could finish. Miss Junsha, please contact him directly when the reward comes. Grandpa, Xiaoyu began, but Fujian, smiling modestly, put up a hand. I hardly did anything. He deserves it. Keep it. Miss Junsha laughed and nodded. Very well. I'll contact Mr. Otani Wang Yu directly when the time comes. Wang Yu merely shrugged and said, All right. Thank you for your hard work, Miss Junsha, Daguyu said politely. Miss Junsha returned his salute with a smile, swung onto her motorcycle, and the 4 people behind her climbed into the truck loaded with fish tanks. The vehicle kicked up a small cloud of dust as it pulled away. Daguyu felt his shoulders finally relax. He hadn't been in this world long and had no wish to get tangled up in trouble. He and Grandpa Fujian climbed onto the Kentaro and headed back to the farm. Once home, Daguyu picked out a few of the plumpest fish from today's haul, threaded them on a length of straw rope, and offered them to Grandpa Fujian. This time the old man didn't refuse. He took them with a smile. I didn't expect Xiaoyu to be such a good fisherman. We had a great catch today, Grandpa Fujian said. Daguyu laughed. Lucky break. Maybe it's beginner's protection. After Kentaro dropped Grandpa Fujian off, Daguyu set to work sorting the rest of the catch. They were all ordinary freshwater species, but there were an astonishing number of them. The baskets were overflowing. One of them must have weighed at least 100 kilos. No wonder Grandpa Fujian had been joking about their bounty. Daguyu knew it. The system's skills were the real advantage. He carried all the fish straight into the purchase box by the door. He was used to the box holding an absurd amount for its size, about the size of a household freezer. But that was just another quirk of the Pokémon world's strange technology tree. He set aside a long silver fish, nearly as long as his arm, for dinner. He'd been out fishing all day and had only eaten a couple of rice balls for lunch. He'd fed Bulbasaur and Kentaro along the way. Bulbasaur drawing energy from photosynthesis and Kentaro grazing on grass, so he hadn't been hungry while working. In the kitchen, he went to work. He gutted the fish with practiced hands, filleted it cleanly, picked out the bones, and slowly fried the flesh over low heat. With just a few simple seasonings, it was ready, and the scent of fried fish spread through the room. Even Bulbasaur and Kentaro, who normally don't eat meat, stuck their heads in and watched him curiously. It was, on the surface, an ordinary fried fish, but with the system's help, Daguyu had timed the heat and seasoning perfectly, turning a humdrum ingredient into something excellent. I took a bite with anticipation, and the whitebait burst with freshness on my tongue, tender, silky, and utterly delicious. It was easily the finest fried whitebait I'd ever eaten. With a little garnish, it could fetch a high price in a decent restaurant, but I had no interest in opening one. After finishing quickly, I got dinner ready for Bulbasaur and Kentaro. Oishi was already at the door calling my name. By the time I reached the farm gate, Dashi was unloading the catch from the crate and sorting the fish by type on his scale. Hey, Xiaoyu, he said, grinning as he worked. The city's paying top coin for silver trout today. You caught a lot, so you made yourself a tidy profit. Let me total it up. He tapped at his ledger. The sum comes to 5,863 alliance coins. I took the coins and slipped them into my pocket without bothering to count them. Dashi's smile widened even further. You caught a very rare silver trout today, he continued, almost proud. Word's already spread through town. Xiaoyu, you're a bit of a celebrity in Panlin. I laughed and shook my head. Just my luck today. I didn't expect to catch anything, I said, smiling. If you catch any rare fish that are no longer protected, keep them for me, Oishi said. The station master says he'll pay top price. Dashi waved and drove off to the next farm. Fujian then went over the money arrangements with Daguyu. The town buying station had long been on friendly terms with the surrounding farms, so reputation was everything. The station relied on the farmers, and the farmers needed a reliable buyer. The station master was a straightforward man who paid fair prices, which is why Daguyu felt safe collecting the payment and wasn't worried that Dashi might shortchange him. If the station had earned a bad name, it wouldn't have lasted in Panlin Town. With the money, Daguyu planned to go into town the next day and buy a few things, most important, a proper bed. He was tired of sleeping on the floor. Oh, I almost forgot. He hurried back into the house and found a carp lying in the kitchen sink. I almost forgot about you, he muttered. If meeting you was fate, I suppose I'll have to buy a little aquarium tomorrow. Daguyu murmured as he stroked the slippery permia, oversized head of the Magikarp. For now, he eased the fish into a bucket. You'll have to stay here just for tonight, he told it. He went to fetch some Pokémon food and dropped it into the bucket. The Magikarp gobbled it all up without a fuss. When it had eaten its fill, it stayed quietly in the water, staring vacantly at him with that familiar blank expression. Good night, Magikarp. Take care of me, okay? Daguyu smiled and said good night, but the Magikarp only kept staring. Daguyu didn't mind. He left the kitchen, laid out his bedding, washed up, and got ready for bed. Bulbasaur, Kentaro, time for sleep. Bulbasaur and Kentaro, who had been playing outside, heard him and trotted back into their spots. Good night, Bulbasaur. Good night, Kentaro. As always, he said good night to the two Pokémon. Daguyu fell asleep quickly, and so did they. Chapter 4. Shopping. I got up early as usual and walked out to the fields to check on the crops. After only a few days in the ground, most of the seeds had already pushed up healthy green shoots. If this keeps up, the harvest should be ready in under 3 months. With so much land planted, we ought to generate a decent income and at least be self-sufficient at the start. I made a round of the plots, enjoying the stir of life across the farm, then wiped the sweat from my brow. Late spring was settling in. The days were getting warmer. I laughed to myself. If this heat keeps up, I really should start saving for an air conditioner. When I finished the rounds, I called Bulbasaur and swung on to Kentaro's back. We took the country road to town at a leisurely pace. Before long, we reached Panlin Town. I dismounted, took Kentaro's Pokéball out, and slipped him back inside. Sorry you'll have to wait for a bit, Kentaro, I said as the ball trembled slightly. There wasn't any strict law against bringing large Pokémon into town, but most trainers put theirs away in Pokéballs out of courtesy. No one wanted to risk causing trouble. Small Pokémon like Bulbasaur weren't an issue, and most grass types were pretty docile anyway, so Daguyu had no problems. After storing his partner, he headed into town and went straight to the furniture store. He'd slept on the bare floor at home often enough. What he wanted most right now was a proper bed. The salesperson greeted him cheerfully as he walked in. Daguyu told her he was just browsing and would call her if he needed help, then started wandering the aisles. He actually needed more than a bed. His house was almost empty. Just a dining table in the first-floor living room and a few basic necessities. Over the years, he'd poured nearly all the family savings into raising and training Pokémon. Breeding and upkeep cost a lot. Energy cubes alone were a significant monthly expense. Energy cubes weren't expensive one at a time, but they were a daily necessity. The original owner had 6 Pokémon, so the annual bill alone quickly added up. That didn't even count training fees, skill discs, evolution stones, and everything else. Once Daguyu ran the numbers in his head, he understood why he'd found the previous owner's choices so frustrating. To support that dream, the old man had sold everything he could. He emptied the house, spent his savings, and finally fell ill. A minor sickness spiraled into something far worse. Daguyu suspected that if the money hadn't run out, or if he himself hadn't awakened when he did, the original owner might have kept struggling on and on. Having inherited all of those memories, Daguyu also understood why the original had been so driven. Losing his parents had left him obsessed with becoming stronger. In the process, he had pushed everything else away and missed the one person who had loved him most. The thought made Daguyu sigh softly. He would sort out the rest after he'd recovered. For now, he pushed the memories aside and went back to browsing the furniture store. A sofa set caught his eye. Simple, well-made. It looked pretty good. He glanced at the price tag and nearly choked. The bedding set was 2,000 Alliance coins. He couldn't justify that, so he politely walked away. After wandering the store a little longer and checking a few other things, Daguyu called over a salesperson, asked a few questions, and placed an order. a 1.8 meters 2.0 meter bed for 2,000 Alliance coins. After giving them his address, he left the furniture shop and headed to a tackle store. There he bought a modest fish tank and a basic water circulation system for another 800 Alliance coins. In the blink of an eye, most of the 4,000 Alliance coins he'd brought were gone. He kept hoping the prize money would arrive soon. He had no idea how much it would be, but with so many people around, he felt awkward asking about it. Before heading home, he picked up some pots and pans and a few books. Beginner's Guide to Breeding Pokémon, Beginner's Guide to Woodworking, and Beginner's Guide to Tree Fruit Breeding. They were ordinary books anyone could buy at a bookstore, but for Daguyu, they were enough. If he could learn some useful skills, everything else would fall into place. Daguyu had discovered that if a skill appeared in the system, he could learn it completely by studying it. He wanted to test whether he could master useful techniques quickly from books. If it worked, then even if the farm failed in the future, he could rely on the skills he'd learned to make sure he and his Pokémon had enough food and clothing. After buying everything he needed, he was broke. He left town, called Kentaro out of his Pokéball, and returned to the farm. Once he had stowed the purchases away, he sat in the living room with a book and waited for the bed to be delivered. About half an hour later, a car horn sounded. Daguyu hurried to the door and found a truck parked at the gate. A haole and a burly delivery worker carried the bed up to the second-floor bedroom and set it in place. Daguyu offered them what he had, cold water, since there was nothing else to give. The two humans and their Pokémon gratefully drank the water, thanked him, and hurried off to make their next delivery. After making the bed, I flopped down on it. Ah! Still comfortable. Bulbasaur climbed up beside me and sighed contentedly. Da-na, da-na! I lay there for a moment, then rolled over. Not time to relax yet. There's still a lot to do. I gathered my fishing gear, saddled Kentaro, packed a few rice balls for lunch, and headed for the river. I'd changed the spot this time. I couldn't keep coming back to the exact same place. Besides, Daguyu's skill helps a lot. The bait he prepares is irresistible to fish, so I don't need to worry about going home empty-handed. I rolled the bait with practiced hands, set up a small fishing platform and a protective net, and everything was ready. Time for this fisherman to head out. Just like last time, as soon as the bait hit the water, I started catching fish every few minutes. Some were big, some were small. The tiny ones went into the basket for the time being. I'd release them back into the river before I left. I fished steadily until noon. By then my basket held a modest but satisfying catch. I packed up my fishing rod, ate a rice ball by the water, rested a little, then went back to fishing. I kept at it until the sun was slipping toward the horizon, then stowed the rod and headed home. It's grain rain now, and I still don't have a phone or a watch. The first few days without them were awkward, but I've slowly gotten used to living by sunrise and sunset. It's not bad. Work from dawn to dusk feels honest. I sorted the catch, releasing all the little fish back into the river. A large fish remained in the trap, though, so today was another good haul. Back at the farm, I loaded the fish into the buyer's box, grabbed the one I'd set aside, carried it to the kitchen, and began cleaning. Not long after, Dashi pulled up in the purchasing truck. He counted everything and paid out a little over 1,000 Alliance coins. All the fish were common species, no rare ones, so the price was fair. I smiled and took the money, chatted with Dashi for a few minutes, then went back inside to start dinner. I cooked a meal for the 3 Pokémon first, and then I began preparing my own. Wang Yu cleaned the fish with practiced hands. Today he planned to make sweet and sour fish. He fried the fillets first and set them aside, then moved on to the sauce. Everything flowed smoothly, each step executed exactly when it needed to be. If anyone had been watching, they'd have noticed how perfect his technique was. The timing, the heat, every little motion. At the end, he poured the glossy sweet and sour sauce over the fried fish, and the kitchen filled with an almost glowing aroma. I hurriedly scooped a bowl of rice, picked up my chopsticks, and took a bite. It was so good it brought tears to my eyes. The sweet and sour were balanced just right. The frying had sealed in the fish's freshness. With one lift, the flesh came away translucent and tender, his skin perfectly crisp. Against the sticky, tangy sauce, it turned into a miracle with rice. The fish was so irresistible that Daguyu even made an exception and had an extra bowl that night. Delicious food is something you shouldn't skip. I'll have to pick up some cookbooks next time I go into town. After washing up, he paused at the fish tank and said good night to the Magikarp, the so-called king carp, as it drifted lazily through the water. Then he went upstairs with Bulbasaur. Kentaro decided to sleep on the first floor, so Daguyu spread a futon on the floor for him. Aside from the Magikarp, the tank was empty for now. They still needed to build a cowshed for Kentaro, and that was going to take a lot of money. They would have to work harder tomorrow. After a last good night to Bulbasaur, the room fell quiet. Chapter 5. Work hard and make money. I woke up early, feeling full of energy. After washing and breakfast, I went upstairs to wake Bulbasaur, who was still curled up and sleeping. I packed the fishing gear, though I didn't plan to go fishing right away. Today I wanted to check the nearby forest for any cash crops we could gather to help supplement the family income. I rode on Kentaro's back as we moved toward the trees, reading a book as we went. As I flipped through the pages, I realized I'd already read 3 books since arriving, but not all the skills they promised had activated. 2 basic skills, carpentry and fruit gathering from trees, had shown up, but the breeding skill hadn't fully developed. One of my skills was still grayed out. If I had to guess, it was because I hadn't acquired enough knowledge yet. Skill acquisition clearly varied in difficulty. The simplest tasks, like weeding, could be done by hand, and their skills appeared immediately, while others, carpentry, for example, required a larger body of knowledge before they could be mastered. With more study and experience, I hoped the grayed-out skill would finally unlock. Breeding Pokémon had become exponentially more complex than the earlier volumes suggested. The handbook he'd just picked up, an alliance-wide publication, was a standard reference, but it was packed with useful, hard-won knowledge. It was also the priciest and thickest of the 3 books he owned. After skimming it the first time, Daguyu finally understood why the original owner of this body had remained only an intermediate trainer after 10 years. So much of that person's training had been random. The individual traits and personalities of the Pokémon had been ignored. Passion alone wasn't enough. Without the right technical knowledge, progress stalled. Daguyu had no intention of following the usual trainer route anyway. When he used to watch anime in his past life, he admired trainers like Xiaogang, but admiration didn't equal vocation. Ever since the system had been installed, his memory had become unusually sharp. He read the big handbook twice and had it memorized down to the page, yet the system hadn't refreshed any related skills. That made the problem clear. It wasn't memory that was lacking, it was depth. One beginner's guide, even a thorough one, wasn't enough to meet whatever threshold the system required. He needed a much larger reserve of knowledge if he wanted his breeding skills to unlock. Kentaro knew he needed to go into town today to pick up a few more copies, and while he was there, he might as well check for any other interesting books. Since putting away his phone and computer, Daguyu had been slowly drifting toward reading. He liked the quiet, slow rhythm of life here. Kentaro found himself enjoying it too. He led the cow to the edge of the forest, slowed, dismounted, and crouched to take a look. Mostly there were ordinary weeds and a few faint signs of small Pokémon activity. He took Bulbasaur and Daguyu with him and moved slowly into the woods. Green caterpillars were everywhere, the most common sight. Kentaro ignored them and kept going. The real reason for the trip was to find useful crops or tree fruit, preferably tree fruit. After the heavy rains, he planned to plant an orchard, and it would be good to set up 1 or 2 trees in advance as practice. After walking a while, he found a few orange fruits that were starting to rot. On closer inspection, they were only partly damaged, not completely spoiled, and worth salvaging. There was a chance the saplings could survive, and if I wanted to raise that chance, I needed Bulbasaur's help. By using photosynthesis, it could gather the ambient natural energy in the air and channel it into the plants. After that, survival would come down to each plant's own will to live. Back at the farm, I dug a few holes beside the house and set the fruit trees in them. After a thorough watering, I looked back at Bulbasaur. "I'll leave the rest to you, Bulbasaur," I said. "Na da na da," Bulbasaur replied cheerfully. The seeds arose, and it began to draw in a faint green glow of energy. Bulbasaur wound its vines through the soil and guided that energy toward the newly planted fruit trees. The flow lasted maybe a minute. When it stopped, Bulbasaur was panting a little. I smiled and ruffled the top of its head. Honestly, what was the point of showing off strength? We weren't going to fight. Once the fruits grow, I'll make you some delicious treasure powder and energy cubes, I promised. When the work with the trees was finished, I headed down to the river like I always did and started fishing. Today the fish practically jumped into the net. I was catching them at a surprisingly fast pace. I don't know if it was because I changed my fishing spot, but today I caught an incredible number of silverfish. In my language, their name is only one character away from silver trout, but their value could not be more different. Even so, compared with most common freshwater fish, silverfish are fantastic, tender flesh, few bones. They're omnivores and grow fast, getting as long as an adult's arm and weighing around 1.5 to 2 kilograms, 3 to 4 jin apiece. It felt like striking gold. My rod was practically a blur from how often it bent over. Bulbasaur and Kentaro were sensible and helpful, hauling fish after fish into the basket. In less than half a day, one basket couldn't hold them all. We hurriedly collected what we had and rode Kentaro back to the farm, dumping the live, flopping fish into the storage box. Even moving that fast, a few of them had suffocated and died. We kept those for ourselves and went straight back to the spot to keep fishing. We worked like that all day. From then on, we learned to head back as soon as the basket was half full, so we wouldn't lose more to suffocation. By evening, we had used up all the bait we'd brought. It wasn't that the fish had disappeared, only the bait. Reluctantly, Xiaoyu called it a day. He'd already had an excellent haul. After packing up, he mounted Kentaro and rode home. He washed off the mud and salt quickly, then set to work gutting and cleaning the fish. They had to be processed while they were still fresh. If he sold today's catch, he ought to be able to afford a refrigerator and an air conditioner. He also needed a fruit and vegetable machine, better food for his 3 Pokémon, and some landscaping stones to decorate Magikarp's aquarium. As twilight fell, a familiar voice stopped him at the doorway. Dashi stood there, eyes wide. "Xiaoyu, did you catch all of these today?" Xiaoyu laughed. "I got seriously lucky. You should have seen me. My wrist's about to cramp from swinging the club." He grinned and started counting. "There are so many silverfish. They've become a popular delicacy lately, but silverfish only come from Kanto, so their price has been climbing. They're going for 50 alliance coins a caddy right now. This lot weighs 506 caddies. "I'll credit the rest to your alliance coins account," Dashi said as he quickly counted out the cash. "Xiaoyu, you really should open an online banking account. It's just luck I had cash on me today, otherwise I'd have had to go back into town for it." "I already have an account," I answered, "but my phone was gone when I came back. I'll go into town and buy a new one in a few days." "All right, that's it for today. I have to hurry and get these fish delivered." Dashi hopped onto the truck and was gone in a flash. I sat there holding a thick stack of banknotes, feeling pleasantly stunned. Getting that much money was a bigger surprise than I expected. I decided I'd buy an air conditioner and a refrigerator tomorrow. After putting the money away, I headed home and started preparing dinner. I'd worked hard and earned it today, so I treated myself, 4 dishes and a soup. After some chopping and frying, the meal was ready. A simple vegetable soup and fried fish fillets made from today's catch. Since the fish was already dead, frying was the best way to bring out the flavor. I was satisfied after a simple dinner of stir-fried seasonal vegetables. After washing up, I lay on the bed and read for a while. When I looked up, Bulbasaur had dozed off beside me, so I tucked him in with the quilt, snuffed out the candles, and got under the covers myself. I still needed to repair the circuit and pay the electricity bill, and I thought about those tasks for a little while. Then, before I knew it, I was asleep. Chapter 6. Things are finally looking up. The next morning, Daguyu hurried into town. He bought a mobile phone, reactivated his online account, and deposited all his cash into it. Then he went straight to the small appliance shop. The store wasn't big, but it had everything he needed. He spent 10,000 alliance coins in total, 2,000 on an air conditioner, and 8,000 on a refrigerator. While he was there, he asked if they sold fruit machines. The clerk said they didn't have one in stock, but he was heading into the city to restock and could bring one back. The basic model cost only 1 yuan. Though it felt a little silly to buy it, Daguyu paid without hesitation. As soon as he left the shop, his wallet felt a lot lighter. He realized he needed to start earning money fast. He stopped by the bookstore to pick up a few more books he needed, bought some side dishes, and then headed back to the farm. The circuit repair would have to wait for another day. Fortunately, the power was still working for now, so there was no need to rush. At least I didn't have to light candles. It would be nice to have an electric Pokémon to rely on. Merrily would be perfect. Besides being an electric type, Merrily's wool was excellent for weaving and fetched a high price. Daguyu even considered adding Merrily's sheep breeding to his plans, but the capital required was far too steep, and the idea had to be set aside for the time being. A quick check of the crops and fruit trees turned up nothing unusual. Just as he was about to head out for some fishing, Miss Junsha knocked and appeared at his door. "Mr. Otani, I've brought the bonus I promised last time, a total of 200,000 alliance coins." She set a black suitcase on the table and opened it for him. Daguyu blinked in surprise. He had expected perhaps a few thousand, maybe at most tens of thousands, not this. "So much," he managed. "I'm not completely sure about the details, but silver trout is a rare fish with high value for both cultivation and sale. Giving you 20 alliance coins is more than fair," Miss Junsha said. "Thank you so much, Miss Junsha. This will really get me out of a tight spot," I replied, relieved. "I'm glad I could help. There's nothing more for me to do here, so I'll be off." She gave a quick salute, swung her leg over her motorcycle, and rode away. With that, today's fishing plans were put on hold. I needed to decide how best to spend this money. Back in my room, I pulled out my notebook and began to map things out. The farm's main income is still grain. The Alliance buys grain at 1 alliance coin per kilogram, and current yields run between 100 and 1,200 kilograms per acre. I'd been out in the fields every day lately. The crops were looking healthy. But only 100 acres are in cultivation so far, and once you factor in costs, taxes, and the Alliance's share, the farm's actual cash flow is only about 10 alliance coins right now. He didn't plan to sell the vegetables. They were for his own use, so he planted just 1 acre with a mix of crops. The climate in the Pokémon world was excellent. Each crop matured in about 3 months, so he could get 4 harvests a year. Even from that small plot, the farming alone brought in roughly 1 yuan annually, which was respectable for such little effort. Still, Daguyu had no intention of reclaiming more land for now. One person only had so much energy. He might expand later, but only if he could find helpers. The second priority was renovating the old house. It had fallen into disrepair over the years. The main structure was still sound, but many parts were damaged, and the exterior looked shabby. Daguyu estimated the work would cost about 25 yuan, and would have to be done by a construction company. There were a few in town he could ask for quotes from when the time came. The third plan was to plant fruit trees to support future Pokémon-related production. Items like Pokémon cubes and Poffins were very popular on the market, and Daguyu was confident he could make excellent cubes and Poffins with the system's help. High-quality Q, Bess, and Poffin weren't cheap. Using the buyer's service would cut the return compared with selling them privately, but it was convenient and spared him a lot of hassle. Any extra tree fruit could be sold directly, and the leftover pulp could be turned into fertilizer. The fourth item on his list was a breeding program for the Melly sheep. He needed to ask Grandpa Fumin what they cost. There were still breeding questions to sort out, but the old man had a large milk vat at his farm, which made the idea worth considering. Even with all those possibilities, the money still fell far short of what he needed. The most important thing right now was experience. They had to buckle down on Pokémon training, and they also needed to learn more about making and using cubes and Poffin. Still, some projects could wait. Renovating Kentaro's bullpen and Magikarp's fish tank could go at the top of the to-do list. The 20 yuan he just earned would definitely cover those repairs. Daguyu put away his fishing gear, swung up on Kintaro, and rode back into town. He located the construction company and laid out his plan to the foreman, who was on site. The foreman was a broad-shouldered 30-year-old named Carter, and his partner was an even bigger, hulking creature called Hao Li. When Daguyu arrived on site, Carter greeted him warmly and poured a steaming cup of tea. Carter tapped his chest and smiled. "This little job will be done in 3 days," he said. 4,000 Alliance coins, all materials included. Daguyu thought it over, then nodded. He took the business card Carter handed him, put it away, and went back to the shop where he'd bought the fish tank. He picked up some small pebbles and a few decorative stones for the tank, then returned home to set it up for the Magikarp. Outside, Carter and Hao Li were already digging the foundation. With nothing else to do, Daguyu prepared some snacks and carried them out to the workers. Carter took a bite, and his eyes lit up. "Mr. Daguyu, these are amazing," he said, reaching for another. "Can I buy some of these?" "They're homemade," Daguyu replied with a smile. "They're not much. If you'd like, I'll pack some for you to take away." "Thank you so much, Daguyu," Carter said gratefully as Daguyu stepped into the room to help pack the snacks. "Keep working. Show Mr. Otani we appreciate the snacks." "Nico," the big man grunted, rolling up his sleeves and setting to work. By evening, he and the Pokémon had finished most of the chores. Carter turned down Dayu's offer to stay for dinner. He took the cookies he'd been given, said his goodbyes, and left with Guai Li. In the living room, Daguyu was already eating with the Pokémon. He decided to try making some poffins and was passing them around. The 3 Pokémon declared them delicious, and even Magikarp's usual dull expression brightened a little. Seeing them so happy, I made a few more. Poffins aren't some gourmet dish. They're basically a simple mix of berries and pastry. But they worked. That gave me an idea. If preparing berries this way helps, would using more conventional cooking methods do the same? Berries come in many flavors. Maybe they could be used like seasonings in regular cooking. The idea felt more and more promising. I'd buy some berries tomorrow and experiment. After clearing the dishes, I kneaded some dough and put it in a bowl, covering it with a damp towel to rest overnight. Tomorrow, I'd make the rest of the poffins. I can go visit Grandpa Fushen tomorrow. Now that I have some money and don't need to run around earning it, I can ask him more about managing the farm. I'll also bake some cakes and muffins to take with me. After washing up, I flopped down on the bed, feeling content. Nothing makes you feel better than seeing your days start to improve. I read for a while, turned off the light, and went to sleep. Outside, in the dark, a small figure crept up to the house, slipped inside, and went straight to the kitchen. They grabbed the packed snack Daguyu had prepared and ate it hungrily. When they finished, they left as quietly as they had come, making sure to close the door behind them. The house stayed still. No one seemed to notice that Kintaro had shifted over on the first floor, and after that, there was no more movement. Chapter 7. How to Run a Farm? With the immediate pressure to earn money lifted, Daguyu slept a little later than usual. After his usual check of the fields and reassuring himself there was nothing wrong, he had breakfast, washed the dishes, and opened the cupboard, only to find that the baofen, steamed buns, and biscuits he'd made the day before were gone. He froze, then looked straight at the Bulbasaur by his side. "Nada-nada!" the Pokémon snapped, glaring at him. Sorry, Bulbasaur," Daguyu said, forcing an embarrassed smile. "I thought you might have eaten them last night because you were hungry." Bulbasaur's indignant look didn't change, so Daguyu shrugged and tried to reason it out. If Bulbasaur hadn't eaten them, then something had gotten in during the night, a wild Pokémon, most likely. Either way, there was no use blaming anyone. He decided to make more. Half an hour later, he wiped the sweat from his brow. The kitchen table was piled high with fresh baofen and biscuits. He packed some to take with him, tucked a portion back into the cupboard where the others had been, and set a small pile of snacks aside for immediate use. With that done, he slung a satchel over his shoulder and set off for Grandpa Fumin's place. The old man's farm, really more of a ranch, was a short walk away, and Daguyu went at a leisurely pace, enjoying the quiet morning and the comfort of having a few extra snacks in his pack. After generations of careful management, nearly all of the ranch's land had been turned into a wide expanse of lush pasture. Only a small plot had been left untouched. The grass was planted specifically to feed the milk tanks that produced the ranch's famous Moo Moo milk. Milk Tank's Moo Moo milk was a bestseller across the region, cherished in almost every household and said to have long-term health benefits for both Pokémon and people. Grandpa Fumin's Big Milk Can Ranch had been in the family for 3 generations, and it had grown into its present size and reputation. From a distance, the place looked like a green sea, dotted with clusters of Miltanks lying in the grass or gently rolling about in 2s and 3s, utterly content. When Kentaro pulled up at the ranch gate, Fumin was already there waiting. "Ha-ha, Xiaoyu's here, what did you bring?" Fumin laughed, and as he spoke, he reached for the Baofen and the biscuits Daguyu handed him. "I made these myself," Daguyu said. "I thought Grandma and you might like a taste." "Perfect, perfect," Fumin said. "I brewed some black tea." "Let's have a cup of tea and try those snacks you made, Xiaoyu." Fumin led Daguyu back to Xiaoyu's house. The 3 of them settled at a small round table. Xiaoyu had already arranged the snacks on a plate and pulled out a chair for them. She poured tea for Fumin and Daguyu, then for herself. Fumin briefly explained why he'd come, and the relief on his face was obvious. Any worries he'd had about whether Daguyu could run the ranch were gone. "Have some tea first," he said with a smile. "Then come with me to the ranch for a walk. I'll explain everything slowly, and you can have lunch here afterward." They fell into easy conversation about family matters. Daguyu told a few awkward anecdotes from his travels that had the older pair chuckling. Bulbasaur sat contentedly in Daguyu's arms, occasionally being offered a poffin which he accepted with quiet enthusiasm. An hour passed pleasantly. When Fumin finished the last poffin and set down his cup, he stood. "Shall we?" he asked. Daguyu rose, cradling Bulbasaur, and the 2 walked out together, Fumin in front, Daguyu following, as Fumin began to describe the layout and workings of the ranch. He began by giving a brief tour of the ranch layout, then spent the rest of the morning teaching Daguyu everything he knew about raising milk tanks. Daguyu listened intently and was visibly moved by how much Fumin was willing to share. After a while he asked, "Which is easier to raise, the Melly sheep or the big milk tanks?" Fumin thought for a moment before answering. "Given your current financial situation, both of those will be difficult. Melly sheep and milk tanks each need specially built housing, and they consume a lot of fresh grass every day. Even with my help, you won't be able to keep that up for long. But I have an idea that's more suited to where you are right now." Daguyu leaned forward, curious. "What is it, Grandpa Fumin?" Fumin smiled. "Raising caterpillars." "Caterpillars?" Daguyu blinked, surprised and a little confused. "Yes, caterpillars," Fumin repeated. "Don't underestimate them. They sit at the bottom of the Pokémon food chain, so they're hardy and extremely easy to feed. And the second point is their economic value. The silk from caterpillars is very popular, but it's hard to meet the strength standards buyers want," Grandpa Fumin said. "But you don't need to worry. When I was young, a senior gave me a set of notes and a few tips. I can pass them on to you. Also, Butterfree are great for pollinating fruit trees. If there are enough flowers, they'll even store nectar. Butterfree's nectar isn't as famous as Beedrill's or Trimillion's, but it still brings in a good yield. There aren't many ranchers raising green caterpillars these days, so the prices are good. If you trust me, give it a try. I'll help you get started." Daguyu didn't answer right away. He thought it over for a moment, then nodded. "I trust the choices Grandpa Fumin makes for me." Fumin brightened at that and led Daguyu on to tour the rest of the ranch. Daguyu even pitched in with the chores, helping milk the big miltank, an experience that felt funny and utterly new to him. Bulbasaur had been having a great time at the ranch, romping around with Miltank and the other animals. Kentaro grazed lazily nearby, occasionally lifting his head to watch the group with a contented look. By noon, after a morning's work, Daguyu finally coaxed the reluctant Bulbasaur away. Bulbasaur had refused to leave, so Daguyu carried him back to the house with Grandpa Fumin. They tidied up a little, then Daguyu went into the kitchen to cook with Grandma Shizi. At first they worked side by side, but before long, Daguyu took the lead while Grandma Shizi offered help. Soon a delicious lunch was ready. After they ate, Fumin and Shizi praised Dagyu's cooking. The three of them lingered over tea for a while. When they finished, Grandma Shizi began straightening the rooms, and Daguyu and Grandpa Fumin headed back out to tend the farm. Bulbasaur, probably worn out from his morning of play, didn't come outside. He had curled up and fallen asleep on the living room sofa. Before leaving, Daguyu checked on him, and satisfied that he was all right, finally went to work. They stayed busy until evening. After dinner, Fumin came down the stairs with a notebook in his hand. Grandpa Fumin came into the living room and handed it to Daguyu. Daguyu accepted it and thanked him warmly. "There's no need to thank me," Grandpa Fumin said with a grin. "Between us, it's nothing. Besides, you helped me out a lot today. This is what you deserve." Daguyu thanked him again, then said his goodbyes and left. By the time he stepped outside, it was already dark. He rode Kentaro home slowly, cradling the recently awakened Bulbasaur in his arms. Going over Grandpa Fumin's suggestions in his head, Daguyu decided they were right for him at the moment. The earnings wouldn't match those from Mealy Sheep or Big Milk Can, but the initial investment was small and the returns were fairly solid. Lost in thoughts about the next steps, he arrived home. After feeding the Magikarp, he checked the kitchen and found they had plenty of poffins, so he didn't worry about supplies. He washed up, then went to bed with Bulbasaur curled against him. Tomorrow he planned to head into the forest to find a caterpillar willing to follow him. He wanted to try this idea for himself. After Daguyu fell asleep, Bulbasaur slowly opened his eyes. He glanced once at Daguyu, then gently slipped out of his arms and padded down the stairs. The cowshed had already been built, and Kentaro was sleeping there, so the living room was empty. Bulbasaur went into the kitchen, found a quiet corner, curled up, and drifted back to sleep. Later that night, a dark shadow slipped onto the farm and silently crept toward the house. Chapter 8. Who Stole My Baofeng? At midnight, Bulbasaur woke at the slightest sound and held his breath, waiting. Someone had quietly opened the window and slipped inside. The intruder moved straight for the kitchen, opened a cupboard, and began helping himself. Just as the thief was happily stuffing his face, a vine whip lashed out from behind. The figure dodged, bobbed up into the air, and hovered over the counter. "Nada nada!" Bulbasaur snarled. "Bye!" the figure teased back, twirling above the sink like a mischievous child. Bulbasaur's temper flared. If it weren't for this guy, Xiaoyu would never have misunderstood him. What a disgusting little thief. Anger sharpened his reflexes, and he lashed out with his vines faster than ever, but the intruder easily slipped each strike. One missed whip slammed into the window with a deafening crack. The glass shattered, and the noise woke Daguyu, who had been sleeping nearby. He flicked on the light, realized Bulbasaur was nowhere to be seen, threw on a shirt, and hurried downstairs toward the kitchen, where the commotion was coming from. I flicked on the kitchen light and froze. Under the shattered window, Bulbasaur was standing there, looking embarrassed. When he saw me come in, he hurried over, chattering and pointing excitedly at something behind him. "Nada nada!" he kept shouting, jabbed with one paw toward the corner. I crouched down to check him for injuries. Once I was sure he was all right, I stood up and finally saw what he'd been so worked up about. A small pale green creature with human-like arms and legs, huge round eyes, and two antennae sprouting from its head. "Are you Celebi?" I asked, stunned. Celebi, the time-space Pokémon, wasn't just something out of a children's film. I remembered it from the movie in my previous life. I'd never been a top Pokémon expert, but I knew enough to recognize legends. When Celebi heard my voice, it turned and, without hesitation, flung itself into my arms. It beamed, nuzzling my chest and making a happy chittering noise. I hadn't expected such open affection and was taken aback. Bulbasaur, meanwhile, had clearly decided he didn't like the competition. With a disgruntled "Nada nada," he leaped up after us, shoved with all four legs, and pushed Celebi out of my arms. The little-time Pokémon tumbled away, surprised, while Bulbasaur planted himself possessively between us and glared. Celebi wasn't angry. It happily hugged Bulbasaur. Daguyu was a little puzzled by the scene, but he knew Celebi was a kind Pokémon and meant no harm. It took some effort to untangle the two of them. "All right, Bulbasaur, Celebi isn't bad. You can be friends," Daguyu said, looking at Bulbasaur with relief. Bairabi smiled happily off to the side. A voice echoed in Dagayu's mind, Celebi's telepathic message, and he suddenly understood what had happened. "So that's it," he murmured. He looked at Bulbasaur with a helpless smile. "No wonder you were napping this afternoon. You were resting up to catch a thief tonight." Dagayu reached out and tapped Bulbasaur gently on the head. "I'm sorry, Bulbasaur. I shouldn't have judged you without proof. Will you forgive me?" He crouched down and spoke earnestly. Bulbasaur lifted his little head, squinted his eyes, and put on a mock pout as if reluctant to forgive. Dagayu melted at the sight and scooped him into his arms. The two Pokémon soon began playing together, and the warm, silly scene chased away Dagayu's sleepiness. Celebi had finished the last of the Poffin, but still looked unsatisfied. "What a greedy little glutton," Dagayu laughed, patting Celebi's tiny head before heading into the kitchen. In no time, he came out with a fresh batch of warm buns. He made a cup of tea, and I sat down beside them, Poffin in hand, watching the two Pokémon while taking big mouthfuls myself. Poffin had no harmful side effects. In fact, eating plenty could even improve a Pokémon's looks and fitness. If Dagayu wanted his Pokémon well fed, he fed them until they were content. After this round, Celebi finally relaxed and curled up in my arms. It tried to pick up Bulbasaur too, but Bulbasaur was so stuffed it could barely move, so Dagayu bent down and scooped it up. "Bulbasaur, if you keep eating like this, you'll get so fat you won't be able to walk," he teased. Bulbasaur froze, thinking it over. It had eaten a lot lately. Maybe it really should start slimming down tomorrow. Celebi let out a soft "bee" and looked at Dagayu. Dagayu smiled and said, "So that's it. You and my future self are friends, huh? You saw me when you were traveling through time and space, so you came to play with me?" Dagayu asked the little Pokémon. Celebi answered with a cheerful "bee" and snuggled contentedly in his arms. "All right, stay here with me for a while, until you want to keep time traveling." Dagayu carried the two Pokémon into his room, tucked them carefully under a blanket, turned off the light, and let them fall asleep. As he drifted toward sleep himself, Celebi crawled out from under the quilt. The tiny antennae on its head glowed a faint green and brushed Dagayu's forehead. In that instant, he slipped into another perspective inside a dream. He watched himself running a thriving caterpillar farm, everything thriving, until disaster struck. A violent turbulence in space and time ripped through the land, obliterating the farm Dagayu had worked so hard to build. From the chaos, a small green figure broke free, Celebi, and behind it stood a man in a silver uniform. The figure looked oddly familiar to Dagayu, though he couldn't place him. The man hesitated, uncertain and restrained. He didn't strike. That momentary pause was all Celebi needed. Not daring to fight, it seized the chance to flee and collided with a frantic figure rushing past, Wang Yu, who was fleeing with his Pokémon in a state of panic. In that frantic meeting, their fates were sealed. The man in the silver uniform, unable to catch Celebi, could only turn away in frustration and slip back into the chaos, unwilling to stay. In the days that followed, Celebi helped Dagayu repair the farm, and for a while they lived in a happiness that felt almost ordinary. Then trouble returned. Team Rocket's Kanto boss tracked Celebi to the farm and moved to seize him. Dagayu fought with everything he had, but the Rocket operatives overwhelmed him. At the last instant, Otani threw himself in front of X-Bat's killing blow, taking the strike and sacrificing himself so Celebi could make a break for it. Celebi opened a time-space channel and slipped away. Dagayu looked down and saw his own body lying silent in a pool of blood. A wave of grief washed over him. He forced his eyes open and found Celebi cradling him. Beyond the window, the sky was already pale with dawn. "Is that so?" he murmured. Chapter 9. How to Face the Impending Danger. Dawn came. I'd been through a lot the night before, but I still had to eat. How could I deal with anything on an empty stomach? I let the two little ones sleep in, gave Magikarp and Kentaro their Pokémon rations, then fixed breakfast for myself. After we ate, Dagayu mounted Kentaro to check the fields as usual and started pulling weeds. The dream from last night was still vivid in his mind. The Pokémon world was stunningly beautiful, but it wasn't innocent. There were evil, organized groups who would stop at nothing to reach their goals, trampling over other lives in the process. If the power of the elves were twisted toward illegal or criminal ends, the destruction could be catastrophic. Thinking about that made him feel heavy-hearted. In my previous life, I'd only seen a few Pokémon shows and barely played the games, just gold and silver and a half-finished copy of something called Pitch Black. I hadn't understood then how fragile and dangerous this world could be. In combat terms, Daguyu wasn't much stronger than a freshly arrived trainer. Apart from a few leftover memories and techniques from the body he'd inherited, his fighting ability barely exceeded that of someone who had just arrived in this world. He wanted nothing more than to live quietly, farm, and raise Pokémon. So why did it feel so hard? He knew he had to improve his training and breeding skills. He'd read through a lot of manuals and notes over the past weeks, but the basics of being a breeder still felt vague and uncertain. No matter how many books he finished, something about the practical techniques didn't click. Frustrated, he decided to go home for a bit. The two little ones should be awake by now, and with a Celebi living in the house, he needed to be cautious. When he arrived, the two youngsters were indeed in the living room, tumbling and play-fighting. He made them breakfast and then sat back to watch them, mulling everything over. As he watched, a realization suddenly hit him. Fishing, weeding, cooking, those were skills he'd picked up almost instantly the moment he actually tried them. He'd been making a mistake. Knowledge and theory were useful, but mastering a skill required hands-on practice. Only by doing would he gain the rapid comprehension and intuition he'd been missing. He went upstairs, grabbed a notebook and a pen, then picked up the Bulbasaur, who had been about to go out and play after dinner, and began to examine it carefully. Height, 1.2 meters. Weight, 20 kilograms. Daguyu blinked at the reading on the electronic scale. A normal Bulbasaur should weigh around 13 kilograms. He made a mental note not to let it skip its daily exercise. The flower bud was well developed, the vines thick and strong, its limbs solid, and its skin glossy and healthy. Overall, the Pokémon looked energetic and well-nurtured. He couldn't confirm its exact nature yet, but most of its traits looked robust. The hidden ability seemed to be chlorophyll, the one that boosts speed in sunlight. Daguyu was short on money and couldn't afford a Dakinchin skill disc, the Sunny Day TM. If the Bulbasaur really did have chlorophyll, that could be a headache since he had no reliable way to trigger sunny weather. After the quick check, he decided the Bulbasaur was developing well. Besides being a little overweight, there was nothing majorly wrong, so he set it down and let it go play. Next, he examined Kentaro and the Magikarp. After running through their indicators, everything else checked out normal. Just as Daguyu was about to take the next step, a Pidgeot swooped down into the yard and landed just outside the door, a small box dangling from its beak. Daguyu went to the kitchen, grabbed a Baofen, and handed it to the bird. Pidgeot set the box down, happily ate the snack, then flapped its wings and flew off. Daguyu picked up the box, carried it back inside, and opened it. It was the fruit separator he'd ordered, a machine specifically used to make fruit blocks. He set it aside for the moment. He gathered Bulbasaur, Kentaro, Magikarp, and went out to find a quiet spot to test the Pokémon's moves. The farm wasn't crowded, but there were still people passing through. It would be bad if anyone saw Celebi. Leaving the main road, they reached a small clearing in the woods. Bulbasaur went first. Daguyu asked him to demonstrate every move he knew. Leech Seed, Leaf Blade, Sleep Powder, Toxic, Poison Powder, Synthesis, Sweet Scent, Vine Whip, Bullet Seed, Shadow Clone, Hypnosis, Flash, and Rock Crusher. There were a lot of moves, and many of them could only be learned with skill discs. Apparently, the previous owner had sunk most of their money into Bulbasaur. It threw every move it knew into the match, and was already panting afterward. Its stamina was clearly poor. I made a mental note of that and sent Bulbasaur to the side to rest. Next up was Kentaro. He went through the motions, a clumsy charge, a wag of the tail, a quick hornbutt, more posturing than anything else. Predictably, that was it. No flashy techniques, no battle instincts beyond making a scene. That didn't surprise me. Kentaro had come from a farm life where there was no need to fight. Magikarp was last. Splash. That was its entire contribution. Well, participation counts. I have to admit I'm banking on potential. Once that Magikarp evolves into Gyarados, it'll be a whole different story. We headed home together, and I started planning. First priority, build Bulbasaur's endurance. Kentaro needs the same. I'll make sure their nutrition is improved. Magikarp can spend this time accumulating the energy it needs for evolution. After a period of physical conditioning, we'll start refining the moves they already know. Before I knew it, Daguyu's handwriting had sped up. He was taking notes faster and faster. A little thought was all it took for him to piece together a lot of the information. After glancing at the panel, I realized the junior cultivator had quietly understood everything. I didn't interrupt and went on with my plan. There was a recovery center in town and a matching battlefield, so we could run the subsequent battle training there. I spent about half an hour finishing the write-up, then started testing a set of massage techniques designed to help Pokémon recover and shake off fatigue. It didn't take long before several Pokémon were under Daguyu's hands, eyes half closed and clearly relaxing. The system really was impressive. Once you mastered a technique, it delivered its full effect. After lunch, Daguyu rode the refreshed Kentaro over to Fumin's house to talk about the caterpillar farm. He still hadn't read the notebook because of what happened the previous night. The two of them spent the afternoon hashing out the plans and finalizing the details. The first priority was to build a special room for the caterpillars to live in. On the day of the great rain, the town sent word to Mr. Carter. He arrived at Fumin's farm almost immediately, his extraordinary abilities obvious the moment he stepped out of the cart. We signed the contract and paid the deposit, 10 yuan in total, 2 yuan down. The deal covered space for up to 100 caterpillars. In the early stages, we wouldn't have the energy to care for many anyway, so we kept the numbers small. Once they all evolved into Butterfree, we'd have plenty of helpers and could expand the operation. The whole afternoon passed like that. Fumin insisted we stay for dinner, but Carter and I both declined. Carter had family waiting for him, and I had to get back for Celebi. I went home, had a simple meal with my Pokémon, then retreated to my room and started leafing through the notebook. The notes were messy, but I found what I was looking for quickly, a secret recipe. I let out a long, grateful sigh. I owed him a big favor for this one. That recipe was truly amazing. The formula used relatively simple, inexpensive ingredients, yet it could dramatically improve the silkworm's health and the quality of their silk. Taken over time, it even slightly enhanced their breeding traits, and with careful selective breeding, the larvae's offspring, Nong, would become progressively better, producing finer and finer thread. The recipe by itself could be worth a small fortune, and Grandpa Fumin had handed it to him. If he managed the operation properly, Daguyu was confident he could soon make real money selling silk. He studied the notebook from late into the night. The notes were messy, full of shorthand and smudges, but nearly every page contained something valuable. He soaked it all up like a sponge. Not knowing when the next crisis might come kept him wound tight, as if a sword hung over his head, ready to fall at any moment. After poring over the pages for a while, he checked the time and decided to call it a night and pick things up again tomorrow. Even if the sky fell, he thought he'd sleep first. He tidied up in no time, crawled into bed, shut his eyes, and was asleep within seconds. Chapter 10. Construction begins. The next morning, Carter led the crew on a thorough survey of the farm, keeping future expansion in mind. After inspecting the whole property, he pointed out a site to Daguyu that had a large open area nearby. On the left, they could plant the trees the caterpillars preferred, interspersed with fruit trees so the caterpillars would always have food. When the Butterfree were mature enough, it would also be an easy spot to collect pollen. 2 birds with 1 stone. The right side offered plenty of room for expansion, so any future buildings wouldn't be crowded or obstructed. Daguyu was impressed by Carter's planning and expertise. He gave Carter full authority to run the project however he saw fit. Before they broke, Daguyu packed snacks and water for the workers, then picked up his fishing gear and returned to the job he used to do. There would be many expenses ahead, and although fishing didn't bring in much, it would help supplement the household income. If Dashi comes by, Daguyu added, I can ask him about the Baofen. With that settled, the team got ready to begin construction on the chosen site. We went down to the river, found the spot where we'd caught the big fish before, and started fishing. Celebi was assigned to supervise Kentaro and Bulbasaur's training. The rules were blunt. If Kintaro and Bulbasaur didn't take the training seriously, their share of the Baofen would be forfeited and given to Celebi. Celebi perked up at that. Dagayu also made clear that Celebi had to supervise carefully. If he shirked his duty, his own share would be cancelled, and if both sides performed well, the Baofen would be doubled. With that carrot-and-stick setup, everyone tried their hardest. Celebi, being a mythical Pokémon, knew far more than Kintaro or Bulbasaur and gave them plenty of helpful pointers. As a grass type, he was especially useful for Bulbasaur. Dagayu watched from the side, silently pleased with the choice to hire Celebi, even if it meant a little extra fuss. I calmed down and concentrated on fishing. The day passed quickly. When I got home, the construction site had been cleared and the foundation work had already begun. Progress was moving fast. The housing for the green caterpillars wasn't anything fancy. It was a little like the chicken coops from his previous life, but much nicer. No cages, and even air conditioning. The thought of that air conditioning made Dagayu want electric Pokémon all the more. He loaded the harvested fish into the purchase box, gathered the Baofen and the primary energy cubes he'd made in his spare time, and waited at the farm gate for Dashi. Not long after, Dashi drove up. He'd been expecting the usual, nothing much, but a reminder from his car's system had sent him toward Gyu's place today. He parked, stepped out with a smile, and called over, "Xiaoyu, what have you been up to lately?" "What else?" "Farm work, same as always," Dagyu answered. While they chatted, Dashi helped load the fish into his truck. After counting, he transferred the payment directly into Dagyu's account. Then Dagayu told Dashi the real reason he'd asked him to come today. As for Baofen, the purchasing station will take it, but since it's a pastry, it can only be sold in cities or towns. Its sales channels are limited. As for the energy cubes, can I test them first? Xiaoyu handed the energy cubes he'd made to Dashi. He had prepared one for each attribute, and Dashi raised an eyebrow at the variety. Because they were all elementary-level cubes, he wasn't immediately impressed. Single attribute energy cubes weren't particularly difficult to produce. An excellent elementary brewer could make them without too much trouble. But as Dashi ran his tests, his expression changed from casual interest to growing astonishment. There were no impurities, literally none, not even microscopic traces. The cubes were perfectly clear, crystalline, and gave off a faint, pleasant scent. How was that possible? "Xiaoyu, I need to report this to the webmaster," Dashi said politely. "Of course," Xiaoyu replied. "But please keep this between you and the webmaster. I don't want it spreading." When Xiaoyu had been making the cubes earlier, he'd noticed the absence of visible impurities and the unusual clarity and fragrance. Even then, he had suspected the quality would be exceptional. Now Dashi's reaction only confirmed it. Xiaoyu hoped Oishi and the station master would keep the matter quiet. The secrecy would serve both of them, a true win-win. Not long after, Dashi came by and phoned him. "Xiaoyu," Dashi said, "the station master wants to run the test himself. He asked me to take the sample back. Is that okay?" "Of course," Xiaoyu replied. "But if we're going to keep cooperating, I need your purchase station to send over a batch of tree fruit tomorrow. It doesn't have to be much. My tree fruit machine is pretty small. I can't process a lot at once." "No problem, absolutely no problem," Dashi said. "The cubes you made are top quality. The station master will buy them and give you a price you'll be happy with. He actually has a large fruit machine at home that's just collecting dust, so I'll borrow that for you." With that settled, Dashi hurried off to his car and drove away. Dagayu left as well, feeling relieved. The 3 Pokémon tasks for the day had gone smoothly. After giving the Pokémon a relaxing massage, Dagayu set about making dinner, basic rations and energy cubes to keep them fueled. I checked each Pokémon's flavor preferences with Celebi before I started cooking. The machine I'd been using was tiny at first. It could only spit out a dozen portions at a time, so the whole process took a while. I gave the rations to Pofin and the others and let them eat first. They'd been training all day and were starving. Of the 3, only Celebi ate with any real gusto. Magikarp settled for a normal portion. When I have more money, I'll buy items to boost their attribute energy and speed up their growth. After a long, busy stretch, I finally had enough for the day. The Pokémon could hardly wait. When I used to make smaller batches, the aroma wasn't so strong, but now the larger quantity filled the air. It hit you right in the nose. They were ravenous. Even Magikarp, usually slow to show expression, looked eager. You could tell it must taste amazing. Watching them eat so happily made me proud. I fixed myself a simple bowl of noodles, finished it, and then went to the living room to read. After the Pokémon finished eating, Dagyu cleaned up and returned to the room with Bulbasaur and Celebi. Kentaro went back to his bullpen to rest, but Dagyu didn't sleep. He wanted to master the information in the notebook as quickly as possible. The notebook turned out to belong to a senior breeder, someone who specialized in insect Pokémon, and whose knowledge was on the level of an advanced breeder, almost like a high-level cultivator. Much of what was written felt like a revelation. With the help of the system, Dagyu could absorb concepts much faster than normal, but the notes were dense and would take time to fully digest. If he could learn everything in them, he might become a high-level breeder himself, especially skilled with bug-type Pokémon. That possibility energized him. It would benefit his whole team and the Caterpillar farm. His gratitude toward Fumin swelled. Fumin felt no different to him now than a grandfather. True to form, Dagyu stayed up late that night studying. The next morning, Dashi arrived early, pushing a cart piled high with fruit. They were ordinary fruits, nothing exotic, but still very valuable. Dashi told Howley, who had come along with him, to unload the crates and put them in the designated spot. Dagyu noticed that Dashi really had brought the station master's large fruit machine. Dashi was buzzing with excitement as he told Dagyu that after the station master confirmed everything yesterday, he'd been ecstatic. The station master of the fruit machine had agreed to hand it over directly. "Xiaoyu," Dashi said, "the purchase price is 300 alliance coins per cube. I ran that against the Arquette prices I knew and found it very reasonable. A normal, ordinary quality primary energy block sells for about 50 alliance coins. Wang Yu's blocks fetch a much higher price because they're completely free of impurities, which means they can be fully absorbed, letting a novice trainer's Pokémon level up faster and without side effects." Dagyu figured that if the station master ran the business well after acquisition, the market price could easily double. That was within expectations and acceptable. To secure and retain the supplier, the purchase price would likely be set even higher. Dagyu wasn't worried that the station master would cheat him. Perfect quality blocks were incredibly rare. It would be difficult to bribe or trick a breeder capable of producing them, so there was no reason to suspect foul play. Dashi grinned as he relayed the station master's latest comment. He said the payment for the tree fruits can be settled once a month. We'll just transfer the money when the time comes. "Xiaoyu, that station master is usually so stingy, but this time he's being generous." Then he waved and drove off. Dagyu stared at the warehouse, nearly overflowing with fruit, and felt a little overwhelmed. It looked like it would be a busy day. After getting breakfast ready for all the Pokémon, he asked Celebi to take Bulbasaur and Kentaro back to the forest where they trained last time. He warned Celebi, very seriously, not to let any outsiders see him. Celebi nodded and took the warning to heart. Dagyu still felt uneasy, but it was the only practical option for now. By the time the construction crew arrived, Dagyu had prepared plenty of snacks and water for them, as usual. After greeting Carter, Dagyu went to the warehouse behind the house and got to work. It was his first time operating a large fruit machine, so he spent a few minutes getting familiar with the controls. He fed some fruit into the machine, ran a few test cycles, and quickly got the hang of it. He picked up the measuring instrument Dashi had prepared and ran a check. The readings were slightly off, and there were a few impurities in the output, but he was confident that was just an initial calibration issue and wouldn't be a problem once production got rolling. Satisfied, he set the blocks in position and started the large-scale machine to produce energy blocks in bulk. Because these were primary energy blocks, there were no complicated combinations or procedures. What mattered was timing, the rhythm of insertion, and the split timing. With his system helping him, the timing felt natural. Others might struggle to master it, but he handled it easily. Still, a large-scale machine was less forgiving than a small one, and about 10% of the blocks failed to meet perfect quality. The remainder were flawless. When a batch finished, Daguyu stacked the cubes neatly in the box Dashi had prepared. Daguyu sorted everything by its different properties and worked steadily from morning until evening, stopping only for a quick lunch. When he finished, he sank into a chair and exhaled, finally done. After a short rest, he went back to prepare dinner for the Pokémon. Dashi arrived right on time and stopped dead when he saw the scene. Everything was already in order. His jaw dropped, and his eyes widened as if he'd seen something impossible. "All that? And you finished it in one day?" he blurted. "We're short on money, so we moved faster," Daguyu said with a shrug. "We have to prove our worth if we want this partnership to last." He was confident that by demonstrating this kind of efficiency, the station master would take him more seriously. Dashi crouched and began counting the fruit. 10 per box, 300 boxes, 3,000 pieces in all. Even with the big sorting machine to help, that was an enormous task. "Won't it break down?" he thought, unable to hide his worry. Daguyu only smiled at him enigmatically and didn't answer. Realizing he'd been grilling him too much, Dashi laughed and changed the subject, pulling out his slate to settle accounts. 3,000 sand, he said, tapping the number out. That day, Daguyu made nearly 100 million, roughly 90 million in total. He was stunned. Breeding really was incredibly profitable, but he also knew there were limits even with the system's help. Ordinary breeders only have about a 50% success rate. As a breeder's level rises, that climbs to 60 to 70%, and the best reach 80 to 90%. Daguyu was now top tier, and with large-scale breeding equipment, he could keep the base perfect rate well above 90%. After Oishi contacted the webmaster and completed the transfer, Daguyu became a millionaire for the first time. Even after Dashi left, he still felt a little lightheaded. Thinking about his past life and the present, he had never come close to earning this kind of money before. He could hardly believe how quickly everything had multiplied once he mastered perfect level breeding. Back in the kitchen, he was giddy and shared the news with all the Pokémon. They didn't understand money, of course, but they shared his excitement anyway. That evening, Daguyu cooked a sumptuous meal and treated himself to a rare drink, savoring the moment. Daguyu called Grandpa Fumin to share his good news. He trusted Fumin completely and was confident Fujian would keep the secret. Fumin was delighted to hear about it. After exchanging congratulations, they moved on to the topic of trees and caterpillars. Fumin said that with 90 yuan, it would be perfectly possible to establish a little orchard, planting and arranging a variety of fruit trees. Over the phone, Grandpa Fumin promised he would take care of it and could definitely help Daguyu. They chatted a while longer, then hung up. Daguyu gave a wry smile. He'd just gotten the fruit, and it was already gone before he could even enjoy it, but it had been worth it. Those trees would be a long-term source of income. All in all, it was a clear win. That evening, Dashi rang. The cubes were incredibly popular. The webmaster had only contacted a few stores, and everything sold out immediately. The station master would prepare another large fruit machine for Daguyu the next day, along with 2 truckloads of fruit. This time, the station master told him there was no need to rush. He could take his time. Charging 500 to 800 alliance coins a day would be enough. The buy-in price had also gone up by 200 to 500, which seemed fair. After all, it was only an entry-level block, and the top price wouldn't exceed 800 alliance coins. The webmaster had even set him up with 2 large slot machines and didn't plan to ask for any extra money. It was just his way of repaying a favor. The sudden financial pressure I'd been feeling evaporated, and I relaxed almost instantly. I checked my notes one last time and turned in early. I was exhausted. Celebi and Bulbasaur had been asleep for a while. Daguyu curled up on the bed and was asleep shortly after. Chapter 11. The caterpillar house was finished, and the trees had been planted. The next morning, Daguyu and a group of Pokémon ate breakfast together, then went to the warehouse to make more energy blocks. Daguyu felt confident that once he fully understood the notebook, his cultivation skills would reach the intermediate level, on par with a trainer's. Having the extra machine made a big difference. Production was much faster. There were far fewer defectives pieces than yesterday, and the webmaster had warned them not to produce too many for now. Daguyu guessed they were trying to contact as many clients as possible and assemble a large, safe order. If he were in their position, he would do the same. Because the run only took 2 hours today, he had some spare time after finishing. He cleaned up, put the finished blocks away, and then went to the kitchen to prepare a generous snack for the construction crew and the Pokémon. An assortment of cakes and pastries, plus poffins, which the Pokémon loved. The slightly flawed pieces from before turned out to be useful after all. Those high-quality primary energy cubes were perfect for powering the Pokémon on the construction team. Carter saw Daguyu coming with a pile of snacks and quickly pulled off his gloves to take them. "Mr. Otani, you're too kind," he said, biting into one. "Honestly, the things you make are delicious. I always feel like I have endless energy after I eat them." "Well, I eat them too, so I suppose I must be getting in enough to stave off hunger," Otani Wang Yu replied with a smile. Carter hardly cared about the names. He waved everyone over and invited both the people and their Pokémon to help themselves. Otani had also brought a lot of tree juice. The day had warmed up, and a cold glass of the sweet, refreshing drink lifted everyone's spirits. After the snack break, they got back to work, trying to finish as much as they could before the day ended. With nothing left for him to do, Daguyu headed to the grove to check on the training progress. He watched the 2 Pokémon at work, pointed out their mistakes, and guided their adjustments. All in all, there weren't any major problems. The 2 Pokémon needed to refine the amount and timing of their skill usage and build up their stamina. Those were the main issues they still had to work on. At noon, just as Daguyu was getting lunch ready, Grandpa Fumin arrived with a convoy of trucks. The vehicles were piled high with saplings, species the local caterpillars loved to feed on. Daguyu hurriedly washed up and went outside to meet them. Grandpa Fumin immediately began directing the drivers and laborers, telling them where to set each load of trees. He doffed his straw hat, grinning with pride as he turned to Otani. "Is my timing good enough?" he said. "Hurry and eat. I've already had my meal on the way. After lunch, we'll work together." With that, he sent the crews to work. Daguyu grabbed a quick meal, set aside some for the Pokémon, pulled on his work coat, and joined in. In no time, the whole farm was alive with activity. On one side, Carter's construction crew were busy with their project, while on the other, Fumin's tree planting teams went to work. Before long, a friendly rivalry grew between the 2 groups. Everyone seemed to be swept up in the competition. Without even realizing it, Daguyu found his hands moving faster. Saplings were being planted in quick succession, row after row. After all, the whole point of the Grain Rain celebration was to put in fruit trees, and today the orchard was taking shape. We arranged for grass-type Pokémon to help after the fruit trees were planted. They'd assist with tending and pollination to make sure the young trees actually produced fruit. The afternoon disappeared in a blur. I worked until my clothes were soaked with sweat and darkness fell. Carter stayed to help with the last of it. Daguyu kept thanking him, because without that extra pair of hands, the job would have taken much longer. When we were done, the crew cleared out quickly. We planted ordinary trees to fruit trees at a ratio of 5-to-1, a sensible balance, and used saplings rather than mature stock. That way, the new growth wouldn't attract or disturb other Pokémon until Butterfree finally emerges from the caterpillars we'll raise. Grandpa Fumin really had thought of everything for Daguyu. With the orchard in place, he can start buying caterpillars tomorrow and begin formal breeding. Fumin refused Dagyu's insistence that he stay. He climbed onto Kentaro and was gone in an instant. After Dashi finished counting the receipts, he left as well. Daguyu only realized he'd been there when a transfer hit his account. Another 40 yuan showed up today. Daguyu had one last question for Fumin before he left. If he wanted 100 of those green caterpillars, why not go catch them in the wild? The breeding house sells them by the head for 2,000 alliance coins each. Expensive, but guaranteed stock and health. There were a few reasons Daguyu decided against trying to catch green caterpillars in the wild. Wild caterpillars started out weak, which would waste time training them up. Catching large numbers in the wild was illegal and could even land someone in jail. And although caterpillars from a breeding house cost more, they were tamer, easier to communicate with, more valuable for breeding, and entirely legal. So Daguyu transferred 20 yuan to Grandpa Fumin and asked him to help source some from the breeding house. He also called Dashi and asked him to bring the medicinal ingredients for the remedy the next day. Dashi didn't ask any questions and agreed right away. It wasn't a big deal to him. After Bulbasaur and Kentaro finished their dinner, Daguyu began to massage them one by one. With each session, he grew more practiced. He could almost instinctively tell where the problem was, how much pressure was needed, and what the condition of the area felt like. He had gradually gotten used to this rhythm of life, and the Pokémon, the direct beneficiaries, felt it too. Sometimes the work brought them pain, but it also brought relief and comfort. Some spots always ached more after a day of training, the muscles and pressure points that got the most use, and Daguyu paid special attention to those. He worked on them for an hour, kneading and pressing until the 3 Pokémon lay collapsed on the ground, humming contentedly and not wanting to move. Daguyu was sweating, but he didn't feel exhausted. After giving the Pokémon a bath, he cleaned them off and checked the time. It was still early, so he went down to the warehouse to work on the blocks for a while. An hour later, he shut the warehouse door, went back to his room, and resumed studying the notebook. He was almost finished. Only some anecdotes and trivial notes from his senior remained, but Daguyu patiently read them through. Midway through the last page, a warm current of energy eased into his mind, and a clear, refreshing sensation spread through him. Suddenly, the passages he had earlier found confusing clicked into place and became easy to understand. He glanced at the status panel. The readout confirmed what he felt. He had indeed advanced to intermediate cultivator. I checked the clock. It was almost time, so I turned off the lights and got ready for bed. Bulbasaur and Celebi had been out cold for a long time, sprawled across the mattress with limbs splayed in every direction. Daguyu, amused, helped them sit up and gently tucked blankets around them. I lay back and thought for a while. Now that Daguyu had started selling cubes, the immediate financial pressure had eased. The bigger problem, those time and space disturbances, would have to be dealt with later. From what I remembered of the dream, whatever was coming would happen in about 3 years. That still left plenty of time to prepare. I told myself I would be stronger in 3 years, strong enough to protect the farm and everyone on it. Chapter 12. Welcome, Green Caterpillar. When Daguyu woke the next morning, he felt refreshed. He got up quietly so he wouldn't wake the 2 little ones and, after washing, began preparing breakfast. Just after they ate, Grandpa Fumin called to say the caterpillars would be arriving soon and told Daguyu to get ready. Daguyu went over to the caterpillar house and checked everything carefully. Satisfied that all was in order, he went to the farm gate to wait for Grandpa Fumin. After a short time, Fumin arrived accompanied by 2 people. Xiaoyu, these are employees from the city's breeding house, Fumin said. They've brought all the caterpillars you need. Hello, Mr. Otani. This is the breeding house's business card. Please take care of us in the future, one of the young women said, handing over a card. Daguyu accepted it and kept it close, then eagerly led everyone into the caterpillar house. Inside was a bright, spacious room with many small partitions. The house had 2 floors and a warm, homey feel. The 2 breeding house employees began taking Pokéballs out of their cases. Out you come, little green caterpillars. As the red lights winked on, tiny green caterpillars unfurled and crawled onto the ground. Everyone watched with wide eyes, taking in the new arrivals with curious murmurs. The young female attendant crouched down and cooed at them. Green caterpillars, this is where you'll live from now on. This is Mr. Otani. She nodded toward Otani. Then Daguyu stepped forward with a smile. Hello, nice to meet you. I brought a gift. He produced several insect energy blocks he'd prepared earlier. They were top quality, and now he could adjust their potency at will. The cubes gave off a tempting, sweet scent. One by one, the caterpillars quieted, drawn to the aroma. Their trust in Daguyu visibly increased. Daguyu placed a block on a small plate and pushed it gently in front of the nearest caterpillars. Eat up, he encouraged. At first, the little creatures hesitated, but the bold ones dove in, mouthfuls at a time. Seeing their friends start, the rest quickly grew anxious and began eating without another thought. Once the two staff members from the breeding house saw that the caterpillars had calmed down, they both let out relieved breaths. From the way Mr. Otani had behaved, they judged him to be someone who truly cared about Pokémon and would never mistreat them. After glancing around one more time, they said their goodbyes and left, promising to return in a week to check on the caterpillar's condition. Daguyu nodded in understanding, and once they were gone, went back to the enclosure. Grandpa Fumin was already there, happily playing with the little insects. Most of the caterpillars had nearly finished their meal. Wang Yu picked up a particularly bold specimen for a closer look. It was healthy and vigorous. The breeding operation was clearly in good hands. The green caterpillar in Daguyu's arms showed no fear of strangers. Instead, it watched him with curious, bright eyes. Daguyu smiled and tilted his head. "Please take care of me from now on, little caterpillar," he said. The caterpillar responded with a pleased, contented noise, squinting its eyes in apparent happiness. Daguyu gently set it back down and clapped his hands together, delighted, in the middle of the field. "My fellow green caterpillars, we're partners from now on. My name is Daguyu, and I own this farm. From now on, you can live here without worries." Daguyu gave them a brief explanation of the situation. The caterpillars didn't fully understand everything, but the idea of just having to spin a little silk every day sounded simple enough. They all agreed happily. He opened the left door of the caterpillar house and led them outside. The little creatures cheered at the sight of so many leaves, their favorite food. Daguyu told them that Wang Yu would open the door during the day so they could eat freely, but they must return to the dormitory at night to avoid danger. The green caterpillars nodded in agreement. Seeing how impatient they were, Daguyu let them roam. They scattered, but not far, staying close to their home, nibbling contentedly on the nearby leaves. Daguyu smiled and turned to Grandpa Fumin. "Grandpa, thank you so much." Fumin laughed. "Silly child to me like my grandson. What other reason does a grandfather need to help his grandson?" Fumin's words struck a chord. Daguyu felt his throat tighten with emotion. He walked Fumin back to his place and, almost against the old man's protests, insisted on giving him a massage. Fumin relented with a pleased smile. The massage turned out to be more than comfort. It went straight to the bones. When Daguyu finished, Fumin's chronically tight neck and aching lower back felt loosened, as if a great weight had been lifted. "Xiaoyu, when did you learn to give such a good massage?" he asked in genuine surprise. "It's nothing special, just something I picked up from a book," Daguyu said, smiling. He brewed a pot of tea and brought out some snacks, and the two of them settled in the living room to talk. "It just so happens your grandmother's been having leg trouble for years," Fumin said as they chatted. "Why don't you find some time to massage her? She'd appreciate it." "Okay," Daguyu promised. "I'll do it after I finish my work here." They talked for a long time, catching up on small things and sharing quiet moments. After about half an hour, Grandpa Fumin got up to leave. The ranch needed him, and there was plenty of work waiting. Not long after he left, Dashi arrived. It had taken Dashi most of the day to collect the herbs Daguyu had asked for yesterday. Once he finished, he returned and handed them over, then left. Daguyu transferred the payment to him and set to work preparing a tonic to improve the caterpillars' physiques and the quality of their silk. With the system's help, he adjusted the brew's texture and flavor so it wouldn't be harsh. The only major cost left would be buying a large supply of elf rations. That would be the biggest expense. But Daguyu wasn't worried. His income was steady enough. He measured out today's dose and poured it into the bucket in the caterpillar house so the caterpillars could drink the treated water as soon as they returned. When that was done, he went to the warehouse to make energy cubes. He experimented by mixing tree fruits to produce intermediate-grade energy cubes, and to his surprise, succeeded on his first try. He didn't make many, though, just a few samples following the general formula. He packed them into a separate box and labeled it. Then he set about producing basic, elementary energy blocks. For the next few days, I fell into a steady routine, shuttling back and forth between 3 places. Every morning, I checked on the caterpillar, then went to monitor Kentaro and Bulbasaur's training, and handled whatever needed doing with Daguyu. The purchasing station still hadn't clarified the issue with the intermediate energy cube, But I'd already spoken with the station master, and there was no hurry. It could wait. In the meantime, I'd pushed Daguyu to work at full capacity, producing primary energy blocks. The webmaster opened all the distribution channels across the city, and our perfect quality energy blocks began spreading out into the surrounding districts. They were well received. A lot of mid-tier trainers praised the product. The last few days have been profitable. My account already shows 200 million yuan. With that cushion, I started planning small comforts. I'll install an air conditioner in the caterpillar's house, and when I have time, I'll go pick out a few electric Pokémon to add to the team. Once things were running smoothly, I took a little time off. I went over to Fumin's place to massage Shizi's legs. A minor problem, but it finally cleared up. Grandma Shizi was overjoyed. Seeing the two elders so happy made me feel good too. After chatting for a while, he said his goodbyes and left. There was still plenty to do on the farm. The caterpillars showed no visible changes after drinking the potion. Whatever transformation was happening would simply take time. The one clear improvement was the silk. The threads they were spinning had become much tougher and already met the minimum standard for sale. Still, Daguyu wasn't in any hurry to sell them. He wasn't exactly short of money right now. Everything else carried on according to plan. The heavy rains had held off over the fields, and with so much to handle, he was as busy as a spinning top. He went from task to task, exhausted at the end of the day, but strangely fulfilled rather than worn down. Life, he thought, was getting better and better. Daguyu sighed inwardly. Chapter 13. Electric Pokémon acquired today in Changpan City. Kentaro Daguyu woke up earlier than usual. He had a plan. He wanted to go into town to pick up supplies and, most importantly, visit the Pokémon breeding center to choose an electric-type Pokémon. He was thinking ahead. If an electric Pokémon could generate power for them, would they need a special storage system? He made a mental note to ask Mr. Carter about that later. Kentaro's first stop was the biggest store in Changpan, the Rainbow Department Store. It was his first time in such a large mall, and he felt a little lost among the shops and aisles. A friendly sales assistant noticed and came over to offer help. Kentaro explained what he was looking for, and she led him to the right departments, telling him to call on her if he needed anything else. He thanked her and set off on his shopping list. He had a lot to buy for his Pokémon: miracle seeds, silk scarves for a few of the team, water stones, and leaf stones. And since he planned to pick up an electric type later, he added a couple of thunderstones to the list as well. With the shopping done, Kentaro left the store feeling prepared and curious about how the breeding center would handle power generation. He still intended to ask Mr. Carter about storage, but for now he headed toward the breeding center to find the perfect electric Pokémon. Once I decide what to buy, I act fast. You don't really know until you try, and once you do, surprises tend to follow. I had thought I still had over 200 million Alliance coins left, which felt pretty comfortable. Then the shopping started. Miracle seeds, 100,000. A silk scarf, 80,000. Ordinary quality attribute stones, 3 each. I tweaked the quantities a little to avoid wasting money, but even so, I ended up spending nearly 100 million Alliance coins in one go. I let out a quiet complaint to myself as I stepped back onto the street. Money really did pour out like water. Following the address on the business card, I found the breeding house where I'd sent the caterpillars last time. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The girl who had accompanied me to the farm before was there to greet me. "Mr. Otani, are you here to pick out a Pokémon?" she asked. "I'm looking for an electric type," I said. Her smile grew even brighter. "You're just in time. Our boss bought a Thunder Beast from a trainer a few days ago." "Would you like to take a look?" Otani hesitated. He'd read about Reborn, an evolved electric Pokémon, fearsomely powerful, but he only wanted something to generate electricity. It felt like overkill to buy a top-tier battler when all he needed was a living power source. The clerk misread his silence and smiled reassuringly. "Don't worry, Mr. Otani. Everything about this sale is perfectly legal. This Reborn was bred by its trainer. He didn't have the resources to raise it, so he sold it to us." "All right, let's take a look," Otani said. The clerk led him through the back of the nursery. Behind the cultivation house lay a wide fenced paddock where all kinds of Pokémon moved about. Subtle flickers of electric fur, spray from water types, and the slow, contented rumble of something large asleep. Otani caught sight of a Snorlax dozing against a mound of hay and couldn't help but grin. If the nursery could afford to feed that thing, running a breeding house must be profitable indeed. They wound farther in until they found the Reborn. It was curled up and snoozing in a shaded nook. The clerk explained in a low voice that it hadn't been long out of its larval stage, still very young. It looked small and almost fragile for such a famed species, all soft fur and twitching whiskers. A young attendant stepped forward and scooped the creature into her arms. The Reborn blinked open sleepy eyes and peered up at them, half curious, half drowsy. The little creature licked her face happily. The girl smiled and stroked its head. "Mr. Otani, look, this is him. He's usually very well behaved." She handed the Thunder Beast over. Dagyu took the tea, Thunder Beast gently, and ran a finger through its fur, enjoying the soft, electric crackle that tickled his palm. "What's the asking price?" he asked. He'd been taken with the Thunder Beast at first sight. From any breeder's perspective, it was an excellent specimen. The girl hesitated, then said, "Since you're a regular, I'll give you a discount, 100 million. Both of the pup's parents are senior elves, so the price is higher. It has a lot of cultivation potential. If trained properly, it could even reach quasi-king level." Dagyu didn't hesitate. He paid without argument. The girl looked reluctant as she said goodbye, then handed over the Pokéball and, as a parting gift, a month's supply of rations for the Thunder Beast. Dagyu wandered the city for a while, cradling the little creature, enjoying the new companion. Later, he mounted Kentaro and rode back, finishing the training he'd been working on for the past few days. The improvement was clear. Kentaro's strength and durability had improved a great deal. Because the farm was a fair distance from the city, he had run flat out and didn't get home until noon. The first thing he did was let Thunderbeast out and introduce him to the other Pokémon. "Bulbasaur, Thunderbeast is still very young. Look after him, okay?" Kentaro said. Bulbasaur bobbed its head and gave a soft, approving chirp, clearly promising to take care of the newcomer. Then it led Thunderbeast on a tour of the farm. The young Thunderbeast wasn't afraid of anyone. It followed Bulbasaur eagerly, poking its nose into everything and watching the world with wide-eyed curiosity. Kentaro remembered the clerk's description of the quasi-legendary qualification. Theory didn't always translate to practice, but that changed if you had a system working for you. In any case, he wasn't short on Moo Moo milk, and he needed to prepare some food that growing Pokémon could absorb more easily. He dropped the water stone he'd bought into Magikarp's tank and glanced around. Celebi was nowhere to be seen. Because Dagyu had to leave on a long trip today, there would be no training. He checked with Bulbasaur, who was playing in the yard with Thunder Monkey, and Bulbasaur pointed toward the caterpillar house. There, Celebi and the other caterpillars were happily playing together. Satisfied there was nothing wrong, Dagyu set off to take care of his own tasks. After preparing lunch, he called all the Pokémon to eat. Thunder Monkey sampled his specially prepared meal and immediately turned into a ravenous machine. He ate like an excavator. Dagyu laughed and told him to slow down. Even after finishing his portion, he still looked hungry, so Dagyu gave him a little more. Thunder Monkey polished it off in no time and stared at him expectantly. But Dagyu didn't dare give him any more, in case it made him ill. When there really was no more food, Thunder Monkey stopped pestering him, drank his milk slowly, and went back out to play with Bulbasaur in the yard, looking completely carefree. After lunch and the cleanup, Dagyu returned to the energy blocks he hadn't finished making earlier in the day. Dagyu could already guarantee an 80% perfection rate for the intermediate energy blocks. Barring accidents, the success rate for the basic blocks was essentially 100%. Over the past few days, he'd been negotiating purchase prices by phone with the webmaster, and they'd settled on a very fair deal. Dagyu couldn't help but admire the foresight of a man he'd never even met. He didn't dwell on it and returned to his work. That afternoon, he went out and spent everything he'd earned in one go. Breeding Pokémon really was expensive. Chapter 14. Caterpillar Farm is on track today. Daguyu went to inspect the quality of the caterpillar's silk. Most of them were producing very good thread, only a few fell short. He comforted those few one by one until the green caterpillars calmed down. Over the time they had lived here, the caterpillars had come to love the farm and wanted to do their part. Normally, a caterpillar can spin about 500 grams of silk without harming itself, roughly half a kilogram. Current purchase prices for caterpillar silk run about 150 alliance coins per kilogram. With the combined output from the farm today, the silk alone could bring in roughly 3,000 alliance coins. If the operation reaches scale, daily revenue could become substantial. Daguyu, however, plans to aim for quality. With the formula he has, the farm's silk can be greatly improved, and that will command higher prices. The future looked promising. Collect the silk the caterpillars spun today, tie it into bundles, and put it in the collection box, Daguyu reminded himself as he set out. He headed into the forest to check on the fruit trees. The fruit itself wasn't valuable. Common seedlings only cost a few hundred to a few thousand alliance coins. He could have picked a few wild fruits and planted them himself. Experienced growers had much higher survival rates. The problem with wild fruit trees was that, without human care, most of them died after bearing fruit a few times. With regular fertilizer and attention, however, very few fruit trees failed. After a quick inspection and finding nothing wrong, he returned to the warehouse to get on with his tasks. The Thunder Beast was still young, so he wasn't going to start formal training yet. Other than making blocks, there wasn't much for him to do, which was fine. He could buy a few books online, not to learn new skills, but just to read. Suddenly, he remembered he still needed to ask about power transformation. He called Mr. Carter. Carter's answer was simple. It wouldn't be a problem so long as an external power storage device was connected. They talked for a while, then Daguyu hung up and went back to his own business. Before he knew it, 3 months had gone by. Summer had arrived. Cicadas chirped in the trees, and the hot sun filtered through the leaves, throwing mottled shadows across the ground. Bulbasaur stood with his eyes closed, soaking up the sunlight. A few days before the great rain, Daguyu had spent a small fortune to buy a sunny day skill disc for him. Now Bulbasaur used the steady sun to hone that move and deepen his connection to sunlight. Over the past 3 months, Bulbasaur, Kentaro, Magikarp, and Ultralisk had all changed dramatically. Part of it was Daguyu's careful custom diets for each Pokémon. Part of it was the perfect quality blocks he'd been feeding them. Rare items that, eaten daily, further increased a Pokémon's innate potential and raised their upper limits. Daguyu could feel it. Bulbasaur wasn't far from evolving into Venusaur. Celebi, by contrast, spent his days sleeping, eating, and playing, and Daguyu barely paid him any mind. As long as Celebi stayed hidden and kept a low profile, he could do as he pleased. Celebi also taught the Pokémon a great deal. Being a mythical Pokémon, it had an easy authority and a knack for showing others how to do things. Bulbasaur benefited the most. They were both grass type, so they understood each other more quickly and could communicate more effectively. By then, my caterpillar farm had finally gotten on its feet. The first batch of green caterpillars were robust and healthy, and the quality of the silk they spun kept improving. A purchasing station had taken over procurement, paying premium prices for the silk. Even though output was still modest, revenue was already in the tens of thousands of yuan per day. I later added another 100 green caterpillars. Because the original colony had already acclimated and the processes were in place, running the farm didn't require much hands-on management. Mostly I just had to keep an eye on things, watch my diet, and make sure I did regular checkups. We'd also upgraded the infrastructure. The farm's power now came from electric Pokémon, so the air conditioning could run around the clock. The power storage systems were costly, but worth every yuan. I wasn't going to skimp on anything that mattered. Improving a Pokémon's strength by ordinary training had its limits. The next real step was combat experience. But that posed a problem for Daguyu. The farm relied on him. He couldn't just leave for long tournaments. Then an idea occurred to him. Why not hold the challenge right on the farm? He grinned at his own cleverness. The venue was easy enough. Mark a ring on the ground and use it as the arena. But publicity and attracting challengers would be the real hurdle. After a moment's thought, he sketched out the rules and the prize to make the event worth entering. If you win 3 bouts in a single day, you'll be promoted to intermediate trainer, he decided. The winner's prize will be 5,000 alliance coins and an excellent intermediate energy cube of the appropriate attribute. Losers will receive a consolation, 5,000 alliance coins, but they will forfeit their most valuable energy cube as part of the stake. He added a line about signing up at the Pokémon Center and called it a day. Next, he contacted Dashi and asked him to help spread the word. Dashi agreed immediately and told Dagyu to register the event with the city newspaper so people would see it. He also reminded him that they needed to inform Miss Joy and Miss Junsha at the Elf Center about the challenge. Grateful for the help, Dagyu set to work preparing the site. He measured and chalked the ring on level ground, cleared a small area for spectators, and began planning the schedule. If he could draw in enough challengers, his Pokémon would get the combat experience they needed, and the farm wouldn't have to suffer for it. Bulbasaur, Kentaro, and the others finished their daily training for the day. Training had become routine, a habit they kept up because only constant fighting could make them stronger. The Thunder Beast had only just begun training, so its workload was light compared to the veterans. When practice wrapped, Dagyu went about his regular chores, making energy blocks, inspecting the crop fields and fruit grove, checking on the caterpillar pens, and mixing potions. He was enjoying his life more and more. He'd grown stronger, his skin had tanned, and he looked healthier and more energetic than the gloomy person he'd been when he first returned. He stayed busy like that until evening. Nobody had challenged him yet, but Dagyu wasn't worried. He figured it was only a matter of time before someone showed up. It had been ages since he'd properly cooked for himself, so tonight he decided to treat himself. In the kitchen, he moved with practiced hands. His cooking had reached an intermediate level. The dishes he put together tasted even better than before, satisfying, simple, and comforting. Mr. Carter, Oishi, and the station master all stopped by regularly to buy snacks from him. Dagyu usually sold them at cost. It felt good to share what he'd made. Before long, a table of food was laid out, and I sat down to eat with the elves. Over the past few weeks, Dagyu, had come to treat everyone working on the farms as partners and family. That made us more determined to move forward and gave us all the more reason to work hard to protect them. After dinner, I made my usual rounds of the farm. Then I settled in with the stack of books I'd bought and started reading. I finished several of the miscellaneous volumes, all kinds of topics, but the one that occupied me tonight was about teaching superpowers. Speaking of superpowers, the one that impressed me most was Naz. It can turn people into dolls, practically a broken ability. I'd been watching for days waiting to see it trigger, but nothing had happened so far. Still, I wasn't worried. I've got the system to fall back on, so panic isn't an option. Chapter 15. The first challenger arrives. Just after Mr. Otani finished breakfast that morning, a young trainer came walking up the lane toward the farm. "Hello, Mr. Otani. I'm Aji, a trainer from Maple Leaf Town," the boy said, holding out a small illustrated booklet. When Otani took it, Aji flipped it open to show his basic information and credentials. "All right, Aji, just give me a moment to tidy up. Would you like a cup of tea?" Otani asked, ushering his guest into the living room and preparing a steaming cup. "Thank you very much, Mr. Otani," Aji said awkwardly, barely settling into the chair. Just then, a Bulbasaur padded out from the kitchen. The moment Aji saw it, his face brightened. "Oh, that's your Pokémon. It looks really strong. You've trained it well," he exclaimed, growing more excited. "I'll do my best in the battle later. Please give me any advice you can." Otani laughed. "All right, let's get ready." He finished cleaning the sitting room, then led Aji out to the field behind the house where they held matches. "The rules are simple," Otani explained as they walked. 3-on-3. Each trainer sends out 3 Pokémon. When one side can't continue, the battle is over. "I understand, Mr. Otani," Aji said, speaking up confidently. He took a breath, reached into his bag, and announced, "The first one I'm going to send out is Bulbasaur." "Go, Bulbasaur!" Dagyu called. The Bulbasaur at his side sprang forward and landed on the battlefield. Aji flicked a Pokéball into the air. It snapped open with a pop, and Charmeleon burst out facing Bulbasaur on the opposite side. "You're the challenger. You attack first," Daguyu said. "Then I won't be polite, Mr. Otani," Aji replied. "Charmeleon, jet flames!" A column of red fire roared from Charmeleon's mouth and streaked toward Bulbasaur. "Dodge! Use parasitic seeds," Daguyu ordered. Bulbasaur nimbly avoided the blaze, and a parasitic seed shot from the bud on its back, hurtling straight at the fire Pokémon. Charmeleon had no time to react. The seed struck, a flash of energy flickered over its body, and pain crossed its face. "Charmeleon, spin up a fire vortex and burn those seeds off yourself," Aji barked. "Then use shadow clones to close in." Charmeleon whipped up a vortex of flame, precisely incinerating the parasitic seed embedded in its flank. In the next instant, it split into several identical Charmeleons and charged toward Bulbasaur. "Bulbasaur, Leaf Blade!" Green blades of hardened leaf shot out from the flower bud on Bulbasaur's back, spinning through the air toward Charmeleon and shredding the phantoms that had been surrounding it one by one. "Use jet fire again!" Charmeleon roared, spewing a jet of flame at the incoming leaf blades. The blasts met with a thunderous bang. Smoke and dust billowed up across the field, blotting everything out. When the haze cleared, Charmeleon had already broken through and closed the distance to Bulbasaur. "Now, Million-Ton Punch!" Charmeleon gathered raw power in its fists and lunged. "Bulbasaur, Vine Whip!" Bulbasaur lashed out, swinging its vine as a desperate counter. The attack only glanced off, enough to nick Charmeleon's path, but not to stop the assault. The Million-Ton Punch landed squarely. Bulbasaur cried out and was sent flying, skidding and tumbling before coming to a stop, a cloud of dirt rising where it fell. "Bulbasaur!" Daguyu shouted, anxiety in his voice. Bulbasaur scrambled to its feet, shaken but determined. It gave a tired wave of its vine to let its trainer know it was still in the fight. "Now it's our turn. Bulbasaur, Solar Beam!" Energy gathered rapidly at the bulb on Bulbasaur's back, coalescing into a blinding column of light that shot straight toward the fire dinosaur. "Charmeleon, get out of the way!" Agi shouted, but it was too late. Charmeleon was still reeling from the last solar beam. "Bulbasaur, use sleep powder," the opposing trainer called. A cloud of glittering powder shot through the air and coated Charmeleon. Groggy from the solar beam, he had no tim, to dodge and collapsed into a deep sleep on the spot. "Good opportunity. Seize it. Bulbasaur, solar beam again," the trainer ordered. Bulbasaur gathered light and fired a second, concentrated solar beam. The beam struck the sleeping Charmeleon squarely. The impact slammed through him and he bolted awake with a howl of pain, tumbling to the ground before struggling to his feet. Thanks to his tough constitution and excellent breeding, he managed to withstand such a powerful grass-type attack and remained standing. Flames along Charmeleon's tail flared and roared to life. "Charmeleon, use your last burst of flame," Aji yelled. "Here we go. Sunbeam," the other trainer answered. Fire and light met in midair with a deafening roar. The two attacks collided, erupting into an enormous explosion that rocked the battlefield. When the dust settled, Charmeleon was exhausted and collapsed. Bulbasaur was panting heavily as well, spent from the clash. "I lost the first one," I recalled Charmeleon, snapping the Pokeball closed. "Thanks, Charmeleon. I'll take it from here. Pidgeot, go!" A huge noble bird burst onto the field, wings beating the air into gusts. Across from me, the opponent called, "Bulbasaur, come back! Thunderbeast, I choose you!" "Pidgeot, use Lightning Flash," I ordered. Pidgeot dove at lightning speed. Thunderbeast tried to react, but couldn't get out of the way in time. Pidgeot's strike connected cleanly. Pidgeot banked away immediately, only to be caught by a sudden crack of electricity. Midair, its feathers shimmered with light and then went rigid. Now Thunderbeast. Thunder! Dark clouds rolled in as if on cue. A jagged bolt smashed into Pidgeot, sending it tumbling to the ground, unable to continue. "Damn it! Return, Pidgeot! Butterfree, you're up!" A graceful Butterfree floated onto the field. "Butterfree, safeguard, then air slash!" A soft protective glow surrounded Butterfree as it raised its wings and fired a razor wind. Thunderbeast slipped aside effortlessly and with a snarl bared glowing fangs. "Thunder Fang!" Electrified fangs lunged from Thunderbeast and struck Butterfree squarely. Pidgeot flipped through the air and landed, its Raiden fangs striking Butterfree squarely. The hit was brutal. Butterfree fell and could no longer battle. I lost. Eiji's face fell. For a moment he looked dejected, then he quickly pulled himself together. He recalled Butterfree, stepped forward, and bowed to Otani. "Mr. Otani, your Pokémon are really strong. I have to admit they outmatched me," Eiji said sincerely. No, Otani waved him off. "If it hadn't been for Pidgeot's bad luck earlier, your Butterfree would have been paralyzed on the first hit. I'd have been in trouble." He smiled and reached into his bag. "Take one of these cubes as a reward. What element do you want?" Aji thought for a moment. "Fire, please." Otani disappeared inside for a moment, then came back with a small box and handed a cube to Eiji. "Thank you very much, Mr. Otani. I'll go train in Panlin Town for a while, then I'll come back and challenge you again," Eiji said, bowing respectfully. "All right, I'll be waiting at the farm," Otani replied. Aji hopped on his bike and rode toward the town's Pokémon Center to heal his team. Otani stayed behind and helped treat the injuries to his Bulbasaur and Thunderlord before they both went their separate ways. As an intermediate breeder, I could treat these minor injuries without difficulty. Before long, both Pokémon were bright-eyed again. I still planned to stop by town later for a proper checkup, just to be safe against any hidden damage, but for now, they were fine. I gave each of them an energy block to restore their strength, and they were soon back at peak condition. Back in the room, I began to go over the battle. Bulbasaur worked like a turret-style special attacker, but its skill activation was too slow. Its energy gathering needed to be faster, and the Thunder Beast's reaction time had to improve as well. Daguyu himself could feel the problem. Even with some experience fighting in his original form, his reactions were sluggish, and he didn't control the flow of the fight well. Especially when Charmeleon used a Shadow Clone to close in quickly. The opponent clearly wanted to force close combat, but I failed to call for a dodge. I only reacted after the attack was already in motion, and Bulbasaur ended up taking the hit for no reason. This was something to pay attention to going forward. He needed to improve his ability to read a fight. Being able to anticipate the flow of a battle, to predict an opponent's moves and plan accordingly, was a skill Daguyu did not yet have. He trusted, though, that with more fights under his belt he would learn it. After a short debrief, Wang Yu went about his work for the day. He gathered the silk threads the caterpillars had spun and put them into the collection box. Daguyu returned to shaping training blocks, then went out to check the fields and the woods. Everything was in order. He came back and prepared lunch. No sooner had they finished eating than another trainer arrived to challenge Daguyu. This time, Daguyu applied the lessons from his previous fight and tried to read the opponent's moves in advance. He managed to dodge several blows, but the challenger was clearly not as strong as Jacket had been. The challenger who stepped into the ring first was Kentaro. When Daguyu struck, Kentaro's anger acupoint triggered, a physiological surge that burst through his defenses. He used that sudden power to throw Daguyu back with a force that felt like being pushed by 3 people at once. After comforting the trainer and handing him the cube, Daguyu watched him go and returned to the room to review the battle. The next few days fell into the same routine. Dagyu's skill at issuing battle commands kept getting better and better. Except against a handful of very powerful trainers, he hardly ever lost. Bulbasaur, Kentaro, and Thunderbeast were improving at the same pace. Fighting was proving to be the fastest way to grow. They were also fed perfect quality energy cubes every day. The energy stored in their bodies was being activated, and every aspect of their performance rose dramatically. One morning, while Bulbasaur was training, a dazzling white light suddenly enveloped it. Daguyu knew at once what was happening. Bulbasaur was evolving. When the light faded, a sturdy Venusaur stood where Bulbasaur had been. Celebi hopped happily onto Venusaur's broad back, and the other Pokémon surrounded them to offer their congratulations. Daguyu reached out and patted Venusaur's big head, feeling the same proud satisfaction as an old parent watching a child grow up, and a little bittersweet at the same time. I didn't record that moment. I keep thinking I should have, but maybe I can fix it later. I could draw it. Yes, that's a good idea. I decided then that I would learn to paint properly so I could capture portraits of my friends and never lose moments like this again. Afterwards, Oguyu helped Venusaur get used to its new body. During the evolution, it had learned two new techniques, self-sacrifice charge and petal dance. Petal dance was devastatingly powerful, but it came with obvious drawbacks, and should only be used in the most desperate situations. It leaves the user confused, and there's really no protection from that confusion except for a rare, innate vine snake trait. Self-sacrifice charge was also risky, strong, but damaging to the user as well. Neither move was an ideal fit for Venusaur's usual style, but evolution was more than a change of form. As the final stage of its development, Venusaur had leapt forward in every way. All the training and experience it had accumulated finally paid off. After evolving, it felt like every ounce of potential had been released. The blossom on a Venusaur's back can soak up sunlight to rapidly restore its stamina, and it can release a strange fragrance that saps an opponent's will to fight. Those two traits alone make it incredibly valuable. Daguyu already has a clear plan for how he wants Bulbasaur to fight once it evolves. In bright, sunny weather, he intends to turn it into a kind of stationary battle turret, a durable, energy-regenerating anchor that can dominate the field. Just picturing it gets him fired up. Of course, he still needs the right moves. Daguyu doesn't mind spending whatever it takes. He's determined to buy the essentials. Light Wall, Mystical Guardian, and Hold are must-haves. He's also considering a range of other techniques, moves that enlarge the attack area, awaken latent power, unleash destructive light, cause earthquakes, deliver ultimate impact strikes or ultimate absorption, and specialist attacks like Grass Knot and Sludge Bomb. Acquiring all of that will cost a lot, though, and reaching high proficiency with the moves will require extensive training. With Daguyu's current finances, it'll take time to gather everything, and then invest the practice needed to make the plan a reality. Venusaur's evolution seemed to set off a chain reaction. Several of the team's Pokémon trained harder than before, and Venusaur itself continued to grow stronger at an impressive rate. The evolution had changed its temperament as well. It was calmer, steadier, like an older brother watching over the others. It often sparred with Kentaro and Ragnarok, helping them hone their skills. The next day, even more challengers arrived. The first to climb the stage was a Bulbasaur. None of the mid-level trainers could match it, so Daguyu stopped sending Bulbasaur out after a while. That left Kentaro and Thunderbeast as the main fighters on stage. Kentaro's standout trait is the ability Anger Point, which is complemented by the scarf he wears. When triggered, Anger Point can unleash terrifying offensive power. It can completely turn the tide of a match. The catch is that Anger Point only activates when Kentaro takes a critical hit. Daguyu was thinking hard about whether there was any reliable way to provoke that trigger. If he could find one, Kentaro could definitely fill the team's role as the primary physical attacker. Thunderbeast, meanwhile, was starting to show its own promise. After a stretch of intense training and repeated battles, its abilities had improved by leaps and bounds, and it was beginning to look like a real contender. Daguyu, known to others as Mr. Otani, took the time to bring them to the Elf Center for a thorough medical check. Only after the doctors confirmed there were no hidden injuries did he finally let himself relax. The next morning he was challenged again. His opponent was Aji, whom he hadn't seen for several days. "Mr. Otani, I'm going to beat you this time," Aji declared. "I've been training non-stop," Daguyu replied with a confident smile. "If you want to beat me, then show me what you've got." They headed out to the training ground and readied themselves. The match was about to begin. Chapter 16. A Fierce Battle. Aji strode onto the field and threw his Pokéball without hesitation. Charizard burst forth in a roar, wings unfurled, steam curling from its nostrils. "Venusaur, you're up too," Aji called. A red flash, then Venusaur materialized opposite. It locked eyes with Charizard, old rivals meeting again, and bristled with determination. "Charizard Flamethrower, show them what our training did," Aji barked. Charizard answered with a jet of fire that streaked straight for Venusaur. Daguyu reacted instantly. "Venusaur, Solar Beam," he shouted. A concentrated column of sunlight shot from Venusaur's flower at the same time as Charizard's flame. The two forces slammed into each other over the center of the arena, erupting in a blazing explosion that rocked the crowd. "Charizard, take to the air and use Smokescreen," Aji ordered. "Venusaur, Leaf Blade, slice through the smoke." Dagayu countered. Both trainers acted in sync, but Charizard's speed was terrifying. It rose, whipping up a thick pall of smoke, then dove like a missile. Venusaur slashed at the haze with a razor-sharp leaf blade, trying to clear a path, but Charizard didn't give it enough room. "Flame charge! Now!" Aji yelled. Charizard plowed through the smokescreen and slammed into Venusaur with a blistering armored rush. Venusaur had no time to fully brace and was hurled across the arena, tumbling until it crashed and skidded to a stop. When the dust and embers settled, a hush fell over the stadium. Venusaur was badly wounded, scorched bark and singed leaves, but it forced itself back up on trembling legs. Sap dripped from a torn petal, yet its eyes still burned with defiance. "Venusaur, photosynthesis, restore your strength," Dagayu urged, voice tight. Ag tightened his grip on his cap, watching for any move that could let Charizard finish the match. Around the perimeter, spectators shouted and cheered, some warning one another to watch out for another of Charizard's fire assaults. The two Pokémon faced each other, breathing heavy. The battle had just turned serious. Neither trainer would give an inch. Another flash charge. Hit the ground with Vine Whip and spring up. Bulbasaur lashed its vine against the earth and vaulted into the air, narrowly dodging Charizard's incoming attack. Charizard couldn't halt its momentum. Before it could recover, several small green seeds shot out and wrapped around the dragon's legs. "Leech Seed," someone shouted. The parasitic seeds coiled tighter, sapping Charizard's strength. Flash Charge carried a cost. It recoiled against its user, so Charizard couldn't repeat the risky Flame Vortex trick it had used before. "We need to decide fast. Charizard, fly up and explode," the trainer barked. "Vulpecula, Solar Beam," came the counter-command. Flames and a concentrated column of light met midair, the two energies clashing in a blinding collision. The Leech Seed tugged at Charizard, and a pained expression crossed its face. At the same time, the parasitic siphon gave Bulbasaur a little recovery. "Charizard, Smokescreen," was the instant reply, thick gray mist billowing from between the dragon's wings. "Bulbasaur, Whip Sweep." Bulbasaur spun low, its vine sweeping for Charizard's legs. "Now Charizard, one last flash charge," the trainer roared. Flames surged all along Charizard's body as its fierce fire attribute flared, heat blazing with terrifying intensity. There was no dodging it this time. Bulbasaur launched itself forward in a desperate all-or-nothing charge. The two Pokémon collided with a thunderous impact. A gust of wind roared outward. For a long moment, they were locked together, neither giving ground. The battlefield went quiet under the weight of the stalemate, smoke and light mingling in the heavy air as both combatants strained against each other. Leech Seed sapped the last of Charizard's energy. It staggered, exhausted, and collapsed, unable to continue. Bulbasaur had narrowly taken the first exchange, but it hadn't come away unscathed. A final flame charge left Bulbasaur burned and badly worn down. Both trainers withdrew their exhausted Pokémon at the same time. "Go Butterfree," Dagayu called. "Out with you, Thunder Beast," Radon replied. "Paralysis Powder Butterfree." A haze of powder filled the arena, clinging to everything. "Thunder Beast, dodge it," Radon shouted. "Now, Sleep Powder." "Thunder Beast, use Electric Net, trap it." Radon's Thunder Beast unleashed a crackling grid of electricity across the field, but Butterfree twisted through the air and avoided it with ease. "Poison Powder now," Dagayu ordered. Dagayu grinned. This was the three-powder tactic that had been a broken strategy in the past. Paralysis, sleep, poison. The field was thick with them. No matter where Thunder Beast moved, it risked brushing into another cloud of powder. Its available space to maneuver was shrinking fast. "Quiver Dance, Butterfree. Let's go," Dagayu added. "Thunder, hit it," Radon bellowed. Butterfree began its dance, wings shimmering. Its speed shot up. When Thunder crashed down, it missed. Butterfree was already too quick. "Now it's our turn, you insect singer." A razor-sharp wave of sound burst from Butterfree and struck the Thunder Beast full on. The creature staggered, its movements going slack as the sonic assault disrupted its balance. "Come back, Thunder Beast. Kentaro, go!" Kentaro leapt into the arena, but a gust stirred up a fine dust cloud from Butterfree's wings. The powder coated Kentaro and brought his limbs to a halt, paralyzed. Perfect opening. "Butterfree, use Bug Buzz." With Kentaro frozen and unable to close the distance, Butterfree's attack finished the job. Kentaro fought desperately, his anger gauge flared, but he couldn't get near enough to strike. Exhausted and defeated, he collapsed. Daguyu recalled him with a weary motion and admitted, "I lost." Aji grinned despite the outcome. "Still, thanks to Mr. Otani. If you hadn't given me those energy blocks, Charizard wouldn't have evolved so quickly." He bowed toward Otani. "Even if Charizard hadn't evolved, you'd still be out of my league. Your 3-pink tactic doesn't work on me now. Your battle instincts are really impressive." Otani waved off the compliment. "Haha, I'm not as good as you make me sound." Daguyu produced the promised reward and handed it over, a small cube humming faintly with insect energy. "You asked for an insect-attributed cube," he said, offering it to Aji. "Otani, excuse me, are those energy blocks you're selling?" Aji asked, looking at Mr. Otani expectantly. "Of course," Daguyu said with a grin. "If you beat me, you can come buy them anytime." "That sounds perfect, Mr. Otani. Your training ability is incredible. The last time, Charmeleon ate the cube you gave me and evolved. Charizard said the energy inside is very pure and helped her a lot." Aji's eyes shone with gratitude. "Haha, I'm glad it helped. If you ever need anything else, just get in touch." They exchanged contact information, and Aji left. I watched him go, then went back to tidy up the venue. Back in my room, I started running through the battle in my head. My thinking had been too rigid. When Butterfree began using powder moves, I should have interrupted it immediately and attacked relentlessly. I shouldn't have given it time to set up. Powder moves can be powerful, but they're not unbeatable. There are techniques like Windrise that completely negate them, although I don't have that move. What really got to me was how well my opponent had studied my Pokémon. I couldn't help but feel a little speechless. Maybe my talent as a trainer wasn't as hopeless as I'd feared. I just needed to be smarter and less predictable. I couldn't afford to slack off, not with the battles ahead. After our debrief, and with Daguyu's help, the 3 Pokémon recovered. They'd been dispirited after being routed so easily, so Daguyu crouched down and spoke to them seriously. "One defeat isn't the end," he said. "Failure itself isn't terrible. What's terrible is not learning from it. We'll do targeted training to fix our weaknesses. I'll do everything I can to help you. I believe in you. You need to believe in me." Bulbasaur was the first to perk up and cheer, and Celebi happily danced in little circles. Thundermon and I felt our fighting spirits reignite too. After a short rest to restore our energy, we got back to training. Daguyu also put in an online order for some special training gear to speed up our progress. I bought a few skill modules I'd been planning on. The first was Defend, a top defensive skill that many Pokémon can learn. The other was Resurrection, a risky but powerful move. The lower your HP, the stronger your attacks become. With new equipment, fresh resolve, and a couple of new skills to practice, we set to work correcting our mistakes. Failure had taught us something useful. Now it was time to turn that lesson into strength. Daguyu spent the next few days shopping for training equipment, destructive rays, and a range of other devices. He picked out a lot of them, and in one go, shelled out nearly 400 million Alliance coins. Luckily, his daily income was substantial, otherwise the purchase would have bankrupted him. After a few days, the shipment arrived. Daguyu had all his Pokémon wear the training rigs except while sleeping, starting them on the lowest settings so they could adapt. Gradually, he raised the settings and began teaching them new techniques. When a training session ended, he would head to the warehouse and work on fulfilling that day's orders. The following weeks were busy and oddly satisfying. Because the Pokémon had to battle while still wearing the training equipment, they lost more fights than before. Their spirits, however, weren't broken. If anything, they grew braver. Each match left them with a clear sense that their strength was increasing, and that confidence kept them pushing forward. Not even Magikarp was spared. Daguyu fit him with a small training rig and supervised his daily exercise in the river, patient with the slow, steady progress. Magikarp almost gave up, but whenever he imagined the day he would become the fearsome Gyarados, something in him snapped back to life. To stoke that spark, Daguyu even pulled up battle footage of Gyarados on his phone and showed it to the little fish. Watching the powerful attacks and explosive transformations, Magikarp's determination strengthened. As the Pokémon grew more accustomed to their trainers, battles became more frequent. Their reactions sharpened, and their teamwork with Otoko grew increasingly seamless. Each fight taught them something new, and they began to anticipate one another's moves without being told. By evening, Dagayu was exhausted, but he still went around helping the group of Pokémon loosen up with massages before making dinner. After washing up and reading for a while, he settled into his usual meditation. A short time later, he felt unusually clear-headed and refreshed. When he opened his eyes and checked his status panel, the notification confirmed what he'd felt. He had learned basic meditation. The practice had eased much of the weariness he'd been carrying for days. He slept well and woke the next morning, stretching and reinvigorated. People were coming to challenge him more and more often, almost every day now. Dagayu's farm had become something of a local hotspot among trainers. The current Dagayu wasn't just strong, he was a gifted trainer. Who wouldn't want to befriend someone like that? On top of that, anyone who defeated him earned the right to buy cubes from him, and that perk alone drew a steady stream of challengers. Today, however, the farm received an unexpected guest. A young man in a red cloak strolled up the driveway, and Dagayu felt a flicker of surprise. The visitor was Du, the reigning champion of the Guandu and Chengdu regions. "Hello, Mr. Dagayu. Sorry to intrude," Du said politely. "Please come in," Dagayu managed, a little flustered. Online, in his past life, people had poked fun at Du, dubbing him the Flying King, but meeting him in person brought a different impression. There was a subtle, undeniable pressure about him that made Dagayu uneasy. He led Du into the living room, offered him a seat, and set out tea and snacks. Du accepted a cup. After the first sip, his eyes brightened. "I didn't expect you to be so skilled with the tea," he remarked, taking another quiet sip. Dagayu laughed. "Ha ha ha! Don't mention it. They're just small hobbies. So what important business brings you here today, Mr. Du?" Du smiled and inclined his head. "I'm here mainly to talk about a business arrangement with Mr. Otani. Not long ago, I had the honor of buying a cube made by him, a perfect quality cube. Those are extremely rare. That's why I wanted to see if we could set up a long-term cooperation. In return, Mr. Otani would be allowed to go into our Dragon Valley to choose a Pokémon. Of course, we'll pay the usual fees. We'll also supply the sugar apples. Mr. Otani would only need to help us produce them." As he spoke, Du reached for a baofan and took a bite. The flavor surprised him so pleasantly that he couldn't help taking another, then a third. For a moment, Dagayu was speechless. The offer was generous. Still, he couldn't keep his curiosity down. "Mr. Du," he asked, "why choose me? I can only make intermediate cubes right now." Du chuckled. "Mr. Otani, don't be modest. Perfect quality cubes made by you are extraordinarily rare across the whole alliance, and it's even rarer to find someone who can produce them in significant quantities like you can. It's rare for any family or faction to get close to an outstanding breeder like you," Du said. "I happened to buy some of the cubes you made, and I used my position to track you down. You can be sure I've kept your identity confidential. Beyond the basic details, no one outside the family can access your information without my authorization." Hearing that, Dagayu felt a little more at ease. The alliance was riddled with Sakaki's people. If his identity had leaked, it would have been a disaster. They moved on to the terms. Dagayu asked for the Yulong family's knowledge on trainers and breeders. In return, he agreed to forfeit his claim on a dragon-type Pokémon. Du was generous. Aside from the Yulong family's core secrets, everything else could be copied and handed over to him. What could Dagayu do but marvel inwardly at the power of a great house? Once the details were settled, Du took his leave. Noticing that Du admired the prized items Dagayu had produced, Dagayu packed a large box of them as a parting gift. Du protested several times, but in the end he accepted, climbed into his car, and drove off. After thinking it over for a long time, Dagayu decided to go ask Grandpa Fumin for his opinion. He found the old man at home and told him everything that had happened when Mr. Du from the Yulong family came to visit. When Fumin heard the story, he was so surprised he spat out the tea he'd just been drinking. Dagayu jumped back in time to avoid the spray. "Are you talking about Mr. Du of the Yulong family?" Fumin asked in disbelief. Dagayu nodded. Once he calmed, Fumin rubbed his chin and said, "The Yulong family are direct descendants of the Alliance. They were among its founders, and their reputation is beyond reproach. so you don't need to worry. With the Yulong family's help, Xiaoyu, you'll be set. Mr. Du is an upright man who hates wrongdoing. He won't do anything that betrays his principles. That's a huge advantage for you. I didn't expect you, Xiaoyu, to have such talent in cultivation. Daguyu felt a flush of shame. He didn't have any natural talent. Everything he had was thanks to the system. The situation he'd been given this time was unusually favorable. Not only the choice of dragon-type Pokémon, but also access to the knowledge of trainers and breeders. He knew he owed his progress to those advantages more than to any innate gift. They'd even offered subsidies for farms and tax exemptions. It was as if they'd stretched every courtesy to show goodwill. Still, for some reason, I couldn't shake a vague unease. I thought about it a long time and never figured out why. No matter. There was work to be done on the farm. After getting up and saying my goodbyes, I returned and threw myself into a busy day. What I didn't notice was a pair of eyes watching the place from a distance. After studying the farm for a while, the watcher turned away and slipped off. Chapter 17, Green Caterpillar Evolution. Daguyu woke with the odd feeling that someone was missing. He glanced around the room and found Celebi already awake. The little green Pokémon floated up and nuzzled his cheek. "Bee," Celebi chirped. "We're leaving soon," Daguyu said, half teasing. "Why don't you stay and play for a few more days?" He reached out and scratched Celebi's tiny head, reluctant to leave. Celebi flitted in lazy circles around him, then grew serious. "Bye," it said, and shivered as if remembering something. "There was a fluctuation in the original timeline. Your arrival alerted me earlier than usual, which changed what followed and created a branch in time." Daguyu frowned, but followed. "So my coming here altered things?" Celebi nodded, then shook its head as if still puzzling it out. "Bye. The future isn't fixed. New changes happen. When the timeline branches, that's normal." "That's not necessarily bad?" Daguyu asked, worry creasing his brow. "Could those changes cause problems for you?" Celebi's expression turned thoughtful. "Bye." It shook its head again. "I don't fully understand it all, but I think it's okay. The future is uncertain, so adjustments are to be expected." Celebi hesitated, then looked up at him earnestly. "Bye, does that mean the thing from my dream will never happen again?" Daguyu considered the question for a moment, then gave a small, reassuring smile. "No, it's basically unchanged. Even if time-space turbulence keeps happening, I'm under the Yulong family's protection now," Daguyu told himself. "If the Rockets find out, they won't act rashly. Still, I need to get stronger." He had planned to spend the next stretch of time improving his combat ability, but fate had other ideas. By accident, he'd produced a flawless block of material, a perfect quality piece, and that, more than anything, had earned him the Yulong family's favor. In this world, having that kind of backing mattered. It was like having a powerful patron at your side. Daguyu felt a little wry about how quickly things could turn around. Fate was strange and unpredictable. "Let's have breakfast before we go," he said to Celebi. Celebi brightened and nodded. After living with Daguyu for a while, he'd grown fond of his cooking. The thought of not being able to come here as often made him a little wistful, but Daguyu reassured himself that visits would still be possible. He didn't bother announcing his decision to everyone else. He just decided quietly. Rabbi spun around Daguyu in a happy circle and then flopped onto his shoulder as Daguyu set about preparing the morning meal. Today's breakfast was especially lavish. While they ate in the living room, Daguyu casually mentioned that Celebi would be leaving soon. Everyone was stunned. Bulbasaur, who had always been closest to Celebi, looked particularly forlorn. Celebi hurried forward and lingered with her, calming her with gentle words and promising he'd return to visit often. Only after that did Bulbasaur seem a little reassured. After a quick, reluctant farewell, Celebi opened a shimmering space-time portal. He cast one last look at the group, fluttered his small wings, and dove into the rift. The portal snapped shut behind him. With Celebi gone, the responsibility for overseeing the Pokemon's training fell squarely to Daguyu. Fortunately, the farm now offered plenty of open space for drills, so it wouldn't be a major problem. Back at the farm, Daguyu set the Pokémon to their physical exercises and then went off to inspect the grounds. When he reached the caterpillar house, he found a spectacular sight. Many caterpillars were beginning to evolve. A radiant glow filled the building as dozens of evolution lights flared, bathing the whole compartment. When the light finally faded, dozens of iron pupa lay where the caterpillars had been. Daguyu checked them one by one. When he inspected the first batch of caterpillars, he found they were about to evolve. He spoke with the later batch, and they promised to look after their companions. A promise that relieved him. There was a lot to manage right now. Having a helper would be a real blessing. After putting that aside, he finished his round of farm checks. Finding everything in order, he locked himself in the warehouse and spent the morning crafting blocks. When the morning was over, he stretched, came out to prepare lunch. Then, after eating, he spent a little time meditating before beginning training with Bulbasaur and the others. He kept a pen and paper in hand, taking notes and offering corrections as he went. It was a rare, quiet day with no challengers, so Daguyu was able to focus on the training all afternoon. After they adjusted to the routine, the trainer's equipment increased by 2 levels. Each level corresponds to 10 kilograms, and because this is the most basic training device, its maximum setting is 50 kilograms. Never underestimate that extra 50 kilograms. Wearing it during drills and sparring felt like a constant burden, but once he adapted, the change in his fitness was dramatic. His speed, strength, and sensitivity all jumped to a new level. Even after he took the weight off, he still had to do adaptive training to learn how to control the extra power he developed. For the next few weeks, Daguyu lived by that rhythm. Every so often, intermediate trainers came to test him, but they were basically no match. Aside from Aji, the skill level of those who showed up was uneven, which bothered him, and because challengers couldn't beat him, fewer people bothered to come at all. That suited him fine. He was busy with other things, and fewer interruptions meant he could focus. In the caterpillar house, the first batch of green caterpillars had all evolved into metapods. The farm's food was excellent, and their energy reserves were overflowing. Each hardened pupa was unusually large and sturdy, roughly twice the size of a typical metapod, and one of them stood out as even bigger than the rest. For some reason, Daguyu recognized that one the moment he saw it. Metapod was the brave little fellow who had come on the first day. Daguyu reached out and gently touched the metal pupa's small head. Metapod responded with obvious pleasure, a bright look in his eyes. Because Daguyu had already learned basic meditation, his sensitivity to Pokémon emotions had sharpened. He could feel Metapod's joy, and underneath it, a strong impatience to break out. "No, Metapod, now is a critical time for you," Daguyu said seriously. "You need to convert all the energy you stored during your caterpillar stage so you can evolve into a bigger, stronger Butterfree." Hearing him, Metapod quieted down and settled back to focus on absorbing the nutrient solution, preparing for the coming evolution. Satisfied, Daguyu checked on the others one last time and left the caterpillar house with a calm mind. At the door, a toucan waited, holding a large box in its beak. Daguyu took the box and fed the bird a little food. The toucan left contentedly. Back in his room, he opened the box and found dozens of soursop fruits and a large external hard drive. The drive left him puzzled. I'd been putting off buying a computer for ages and finally decided to order one right then from my phone. In this world, video games barely exist. PCs are basically just for office work, and the hardware specs are all about the same, so there was no need to be picky. I glanced at the sky. It was getting late. Delivery would probably be tomorrow. I carefully put the sugar apple and the external hard drive away, then went to the kitchen to make dinner. While I was cooking, my phone buzzed with a text from Du, asking if I'd received the things he'd sent. I wiped my hands on a towel and replied that I had. Du answered with a terse, "Understood." And then nothing else happened. Daguyu took the initiative and messaged Du, saying he'd send a text when he'd finished making the blocks. Du's reply was the same, "Understood." That sugar apple was a dragon-type fruit, one of the rarest and most valuable kinds. It was on the same level as those fruits that increase your attribute caps. Sugar apples can only be grown where dragon energy is abundant, so there are only a few suitable spots. Yulong Valley, part of the Yulong family's holdings, is one of them. 50 of the fruit were here, each valued at 100 million alliance coins, 5 billion in all. The number made Daguyu's mouth go dry. Earning that much would take him years of working day and night, he thought. After dinner, he put off making the cubes until the next day and went to rest, planning to recharge his energy tonight. Chapter 18. Look at his thighs. They're so thick and strong. So that's how it is. Early that morning, Daguyu was buried in files on his computer, hundreds of gigabytes of study material. Even skimming a little of it helped a lot. Things that had been unclear before suddenly made sense. The resources of the big family were overwhelming. Years of accumulated knowledge simply couldn't be matched by ordinary people. If he hadn't ended up connected to such a powerful house, he might only have scraped by at the most basic level. Now that he had access, he intended to make the most of it. After shutting the computer, Daguyu went downstairs to make breakfast. Bulbasaur and the others were already out in the front yard training, so he put together a hearty meal for them. Once they'd eaten, he headed to the warehouse to start making the dragon blocks. He brought a small juicer, because the batch was small and he wanted to maximize the quality of the energy cubes. Since taste wasn't a concern, he didn't need to blend in any other fruit, which sped the process up considerably. In about an hour, he produced 50 sugar apples. All of them were flawless. I picked one up and inspected it. The color was crystal clear, and its scent was mellow and lingering. No dragon-type Pokémon could resist something like this, I thought, and began gathering the cubes carefully, one by one. The last one felt different from the rest. After a closer look, I realized it wasn't just a regular cube, it was high grade. My status panel pinged. I had just advanced to a high-level cultivator. I closed my eyes and focused, and everything that had been fuzzy or confusing before suddenly snapped into place. The intermediate trainer skills opened up before me on the interface, and I went silent. It was obvious my original body and I had always been lacking in trainer talent. Thinking of Aji for a moment, I pushed the thought away, gathered myself, and sent Du a text to have someone come pick up the cubes. Then I got to work on today's orders. As usual, I produced sample high-grade universal model cubes and asked the procurement manager at the buying station to appraise their value. He stayed busy until noon. Just then a Tugugu, one of the family's large-billed gulls bred specifically for transport, landed in front of him and dropped a note at his feet. The instructions were simple. Give the cube to this gull. It's a trusted carrier used by the family. Daguyu went to the warehouse, handed the sealed cubes to the bird, and fed it a few baofen. After it swallowed the feed, the gull gave a satisfied croak, tucked the box in its beak, called out, and quickly took off. While watching it go, Daguyu sent Du a message. Thanks to the information Du had provided, he'd broken through the bottleneck in his technique and could now produce high-quality blocks. Du answered with obvious relief and excitement. That removed the last obstacle to choosing dragon-type Pokémon. Daguyu thought the same. In a large household, every dragon-type was valuable. Even if one's aptitude wasn't ideal, there was still a duty to raise it properly. Casually giving one away could weaken the family's foundation. Now that he could produce higher-value blocks, that worry was gone. After all, a cultivator who can make high-level, perfect-quality energy blocks is a talent every family wants. An advanced, perfect-quality enhancement would still be effective even against king-level Pokémon. Each individual boost might be small, but they add up over time. The stronger a Pokémon becomes, the fewer external aids remain that can meaningfully increase its power. Without real adventures and battles to push its limits, it can be very difficult for a Pokémon to make further breakthroughs in its lifetime. By that logic, Daguyu's current value far outstripped that of a dragon cub. Any sensible person would make the same choice. As for which dragon he wanted, Daguyu already had one in mind. He planned to go to Dragon Valley and see if he could find it. Even so, with his present resources, it would still be a grueling task to raise a quasi-god-level Pokémon. He'd have to work a lot harder to fund that kind of cultivation. Pulling himself back to the immediate problem, Daguyu took stock of his finances. There were roughly 800 million Alliance coins in his account. The Caterpillar House produced about 5 Alliance coins a day, and the fruit trees were nearly mature and would soon provide additional income. Running the farm personally was becoming a burden. He was thinking of stepping away from day-to-day farming. There was simply too much on his plate now. Or maybe he should hire help instead. Forget it. He'd try to find a butler-type Pokémon another way. There weren't many of those Pokémon on the market, and ordering one from a breeding house meant an unknown wait. Why not ask Du for help? That was a good option. Daguyu texted Du. Du answered that he would ask around and let him know what he found. Good to have contacts, Daguyu thought with a small smile, and he could get back to his own projects. Their block production was already hitting high quality, and the extra revenue looked promising. The caterpillar house would be expanded next. Daguyu intended to scale it up to 2,000 caterpillars. The whole breeding and management process was now well established and mature, so scaling up shouldn't be a problem. The existing green caterpillars would help acclimate the newcomers, and the new ones would integrate into the farm quickly. The expansion would cost roughly 400 million alliance coins. The surrounding forest needed enlarging too, including planting fruit trees, which would add another estimated 150 million. I decided to dig a large lake on the farm, connecting it directly to the river. I'd raise some water-type Pokémon to help with irrigation, and when I had free time, go fishing. Life sounded perfect. The lake and its systems would cost about 100 million. The rest of the money was untouchable. Only a portion for daily expenses could be used, and some had to be kept for emergencies. Once the plan was clear in my head, I called Mr. Carter and ran it past him. He said it was fine and that he would take full responsibility for overseeing the construction. We chatted for a while, and Carter complained, half joking, about his daughter. She wanted to become a top coordinator, but lazed around the house all day and left everything in a mess. By the way, Mr. Otani, he said, if it's not too much trouble, could she come train at your farm for a while? Haha, no problem. I'll look after her, I said. Thank you so much, he replied gratefully. After I hung up, I sat at the computer looking through some files and received a message from Du. He said his father knew a couple who loved managing their household and worked with Pokémon, and they had 2 children. You can go and take a look when the time comes, the other trainer said, and Daguyu thanked him profusely. Later, to return the favor, Daguyu cooked a large, homemade meal for his guest. Avalon was an unusual Pokémon, a native of the Galar region with a rare normal, psychic typing, something trainers in Johto rarely ever saw. Daguyu found the creature fascinating and spent the afternoon lost in study and notes, trying to learn everything he could about it. It wasn't until his Bulbasaur padded into the room and gave him a resentful stare that he realized how late it had become. He apologized at once, then set about preparing a sumptuous dinner for everyone. He tasted a little himself, but didn't linger. Once the plates were cleared, he returned to his books and continued studying into the evening. Before he turned in for the night, Du stopped by and told him he'd come by in the morning to pick him up. They planned to go look for a dragon-type Pokémon and then visit the Butler siblings. With that settled, Daguyu went to bed and fell into a beautiful, peaceful dream. Chapter 19. First Encounter with the Quasi-God Cub. The next morning, Daguyu climbed into the car Du had sent to pick him up. Before leaving, he told Bulbasaur and the others to watch the house. He'd be back soon. After about an hour's drive, they arrived at the Yulong family estate. The manor was enormous, perched on the city's edge. The car rolled through the gate and stopped in front of the main hall. Du was already waiting at the doorway, flanked by several older men. After exchanging greetings, Du led Daguyu down into Yulong Valley. Guards lined the road, a clear sign that security here was strict, but with Du at his side, they passed without incident. Du took him straight to the nursery. It was filled with newborn Pokémon from the valley, quasi-god cubs that would be worth a fortune outside these walls. They weren't shy around strangers. A few of them ran up and rubbed against Du, nuzzling and clamoring for attention. The room was full of baby Pokémon, mostly Dratini, followed by Charmander, Dragonite, a bunch of round little landsharks, and a few Fangs. Even though they were quasi-divine beings in adult form, they were irresistibly cute as youngsters. Daguyu couldn't help but play with them for a long time. Du sat nearby, quietly teasing the little ones as well. It was a rare chance for him to relax. Daguyu finally stood up, cradling a few of the babies in his arms. "How will you pick one?" Du asked. Just pick the round land shark, Dagayu said. Du snapped his fingers and summoned several of the chubby land sharks. They were busily nibbling on things around the room. He held them up for Dagayu to choose. Dagayu squatted down and pulled a handful of high-level cubes out of his pocket. At once the little Pokémon in front of him went still. The others nearby drifted over too. They didn't rush to snatch the cubes, probably because Du was there, but the hunger in their eyes was obvious. Before Dagayu could finish speaking, one of the round land sharks lunged. It clamped its jaws around his hand, then spat it back out. A few of the cubes were gone. The land shark blinked, chewed them a couple of times, and swallowed. Dagayu blinked in surprise, and Du couldn't help a short laugh at the abrupt choice. The other round land sharks behind it suddenly turned aggressive and lunged, swarming the little one and dragging it into a scuffle. Dagayu moved fast. He pulled them apart, reached into his pack for more food, and split it into portions until the mob settled down. "Hey, follow me, and you'll have delicious meals every day," he said, smiling. "I'll cook you all kinds of tasty things." The first round land shark didn't hesitate. It bolted straight for Dagayu and clambered into his arms, asking for a hug. Dagayu couldn't help but feel a bit exasperated and amused at once that the thing was hopelessly food-motivated. "Would you like to be my Pokémon?" he asked, taking out the luxury ball he'd been given earlier. The round land shark reached up with its stubby little paws, touched the ball, and instantly dissolved into a red light that sank into the luxury ball without a struggle. Du watched the capture with an odd expression, clearly amused, smiling to himself but saying nothing. Dagayu released the little creature again. It snuggled against him, acting totally coquettish and begging for more food. He gave it all the cubes he'd brought that day. "Kowu, kowu," the round land shark munched happily, tail wagging contentedly. After the snack, the creature promptly lavished Dagayu with wet affection, dragging its big tongue across his face. "Oh, land shark, stop it!" Dagayu tried to squirm away, but the Pokémon just nuzzled him and kept licking until his face was thoroughly slobbery. There was nothing for it but to stick it back in its Pokéball. Du then pulled Dagayu away from the Yulong residence and drove to a villa owned by a friend of his father. They didn't wait long before the car stopped and Du let him inside. In the study, the villa's owner, an elderly gentleman, was already waiting. 2 sen, Ior attendants stood at his sides, a stern-looking man to the left and a smiling woman to the right. Behind each of them, a small, nervous aide lingered. Du and Dagayu took seats. The 2 senior attendants poured tea and set out snacks, then fell back to the old man's side. The 2 little aides, having just been sharply reprimanded by their father, shuffled forward timidly. The old man smiled and gave each child a piece of dessert. They accepted it, but neither dared take a bite. Both glanced up at their father for permission. The steward sighed softly, nodded, and motioned for them to eat. The 2 little ones nibbled at the snacks in tiny bites. As they ate, the atmosphere eased. One of them did his best to mimic his father's expression, while the other peeked up at Dagayu with curious eyes. Dagayu returned the look with a warm smile. The little creature was a bit shy, but managed a polite grin in reply. "I should have trusted my old friend's recommendation without question," the elderly man said, "but Guanxi is like family to me. I watched these 2 grow up. I think of them as my own grandchildren. That's why I worry. I wanted to meet the people who will be taking care of them firsthand." "Mr. Peatfin, we understand your concern," Du replied, "but please be assured, Mr. Otani is an excellent breeder. You can see how much he cares for Pokémon." He turned and looked at Otani with genuine respect. "You have my word," Dagayu added. "I will treat them as family and as partners." The old man nodded. "Very well. I'll have the driver bring them to your farm tomorrow, but I want to say goodbye to them today." "All right, we won't keep you any longer." Du and Dagayu stood, bowed politely, and took their leave. He genuinely liked those 2 servants, liked them from the bottom of his heart. When Dagayu came back to the farm, Du had no intention of going anywhere. Dagayu raised an eyebrow. "It's your rare day off today. I came by to visit your place. Why aren't you at the gate to greet me?" Du shrugged. "Why would I do that? Since you have the day off, I'm going to cook you a good meal. Consider it a reward for today's hero." Dagayu laughed and followed him inside. Back at the farmhouse, Dew settled comfortably in the living room, enjoying the air conditioning, munching on snacks and watching TV. He grinned to himself, thinking, I never get tired of these. Not long after, Daguyu had laid out a table groaning with food. Woo, he called. Get all your Pokémon out. I've prepared something for them too. Dew nodded and motioned for his team. One by one his Pokémon were released. Charizard, a Pteranodon-like flyer, Dragonite, a proud Gyarados, Bangiras, Haxorus. Fortunately, the living room in Daguyu's house was large, so even with Bulbasaur, Kintaro, and the Thunder Beast, there was plenty of room. A Magikarp glubbed contentedly in the bathtub, glaring at the majestic red Gyarados with obvious envy. Daguyu then freed the land shark. It launched out of its ball with a single powerful bound, and before anyone could react, clamped its jaws, more of a playful nip than anything vicious, right onto Daguyu's head. Chaos and laughter followed. Daguyu yelped and staggered, Dew burst out laughing, and the Pokémon crowded around curiously, ready to share in the unexpected feast. Oh my, ogre, let go. Daguyu hauled the little ogre off Dew's head with a sharp tug. Bulbasaur and Kintaro crowded around them, clearly worried. It's okay, Daguyu soothed, brushing himself off. Let's get ready to eat. This is Landshark. We'll be friends from now on. Landshark, meet Venusaur, Kintaro, Thunderbeast, and Magikarp. He introduced them one by one, and then everyone settled down to eat. The Pokémon dug in happily. When the bowls ran low, they kept sending someone back to the kitchen for more. They kept cooking and refilling plates until everyone had eaten their fill. Afterwards, several of the Pokémon lay about lazily, stuffed and content, while Bulbasaur went out to the yard for a bit of practice. Daguyu put the kettle on and brewed a pot of tea. As they sipped, he took the chance to ask Dew about some of his battles. Dew had nothing to hide and answered every question openly. The evening passed in warm conversation and good humor. The host and his guests enjoyed themselves. When it was time to leave, Daguyu pressed a large box of snacks into Dew's hands. This time Dew didn't refuse. He accepted it. With a last nod, he climbed onto the fire-breathing dragon and rode off in a flash, looking every bit as cool as he sounded. Daguyu was tidying up when his phone buzzed. A notification popped up. He'd been added to a group chat. At everyone, Giant of Light here. This is Daguyu, a senior breeder from Chengdu. Honestly, Daguyu's skills are the best in the Alliance. Oh, a new member? Hello, are you the first one from the Crafts Alliance? Why did Dew add me to this group without telling me first? He'd insisted I change my display name beforehand, and now here I am, trapped in the chat. Notifications exploded as more people chimed in to welcome me. A little later, Dew posted a selfie of himself snacking on the couch. The chat blew up with playful complaints. Dew, you bastard, don't you know I'm working overtime? You're making me hungry. You're working overtime and still have time to post? Dew shot back. I didn't recognize most of the names in the group, so I kept quiet and watched the banter. Then I sent a red envelope to the chat. 8,888 Alliance coins. A stream of thanks boss messages flooded the group chat. Why did I only get 0.1 yuan? Who can you blame for your bad luck? Dew, you should send one too. No time, just having a snack. Photo attached. Damn you, I want to come over for snacks. Sorry, I'm finished eating. What a jerk. After the flurry of messages died down, the chat slid back into its usual quiet lurk. I hadn't expected Dew to have such terrible taste. I packed up, washed my face, and then dove back into the sea of knowledge. Chapter 20. The Arrival of the Ibutan Siblings. The next morning, the Peterfin family's driver pulled up at Daguyu's farm with the Ibutan siblings in tow. City-raised and unused to open space, they fell quiet for a moment as they took in the wide fields and low, sunlit buildings. The younger sister's eyes sparkled. She ran off at once, laughing and exploring the rows of crops. The older brother tried to act more mature, darting after her to keep her from getting into trouble, but his sister only grinned indulgently and ignored his warnings. Their steward, the household man who had accompanied them, watched the pair and shrugged helplessly. Daguyu stepped out of the farmhouse just as the driver approached. The man handed Daguyu a Pokéball, nodded, and drove away. Daguyu reached out and ruffled the older boy's hair. "Don't be so formal," he said. "There aren't so many rules here. Just relax and be like your sister." The older brother sent a quiet thought to Daguyu through the small horns on his head. Is that so? Still, don't worry. We're not an aristocratic family, the thought said. We're used to simple things. He gave a stubborn little shake of his head, still a touch guarded despite his words. Then the younger sister returned, clutching a messy bouquet of wildflowers she had picked along the way. She thrust them into Daguyu's hands with a beaming smile. Daguyu accepted them gladly. Thank you. Daguyu reached out and gently ruffled the girl's hair. She squinted and tilted her head, clearly enjoying it. The elder boy, the one who served as their butler, looked at his mischievous sister and sighed softly. Daguyu took the siblings' small hands and led them into the room. A round land shark was busily gnawing on a table leg, and Bulbasaur had looped a vine under it and hoisted it up to keep it from chewing more. Daguyu covered his face with both hands, at a loss for words. Only now did he understand the look Dew had given him earlier. When the land shark is hungry, it will bite anything nearby, and its jaws are strong enough to tear through steel. In just one day, it had wrecked nearly every piece of furniture in the house. Everyone, these two are the Guanxi brother and sister. They'll be living with us from now on, Daguyu announced, then introduced each of their current companions one by one. The brother and sister returned the greetings politely. Afterward, Daguyu walked them around the farm so they could get to know the place. After all, they'd be helping him manage it from now on. The farm was already well into construction. We were expanding the caterpillar house, planting trees throughout the forest, and even shaping a lake everyone was looking forward to for the upcoming Great Gayu Festival. The plan was to build a pavilion in the center so we could sit, drink tea, and enjoy the view. After showing the brother and sister around the property, I assigned rooms for them. Bulbasaur was sleeping in the living room now. He'd grown too large to fit into Daguyu's small room and had been sulking about it for days. Kentaro was a quiet sort. After dinner, he went back to the cowshed to sleep. The Thunder Beast slept beside Daguyu. With everyone settled, Daguyu got to work. He took Guanxi and his sister to the warehouse to make the blocks. Dew was sending tree fruits to us every day by toucan for processing, then collecting the finished goods afterward. The payment, the processing fee, was deposited directly into Daguyu's account. It wasn't a trivial sum. The fruits were provided by outside parties, and Dew was generous, paying 100 million for each processing. Daguyu thought, not for the first time, how nice it would be to have a whole pile of friends like these. They finished the day's energy cube around noon, and he walked Guanxi and his little sister back to the house to make lunch. Both children pitched in. The girl was clearly fascinated by cooking, so Daguyu showed her patiently what to do, while her brother helped with the vegetable chopping. His movements were awkward but practiced. He had done this before. With the two Pokémon helping as well, lunch came together much faster than usual. After eating, Daguyu took the siblings to the caterpillar house. They were in the middle of an expansion, but it hadn't disturbed the caterpillars and metapods that lived inside. He taught the two kids how to work there, how to handle the critters gently, where to put new leaves, and how to check the cocoons. They finished the tasks together, then wandered through the nearby woods for a while. There were signs that wild Pokémon had been through, but Daguyu wasn't worried. Those kinds of traces were normal. Back in the room later, he taught Guanxi and his sister the recipe for the green caterpillar dish, explaining each step as they practiced. It had been a full, useful day, and Daguyu felt quietly glad to be surrounded by such eager, reliable help. From then on, the two of them took over the daily task of preparing the medicine for the green caterpillars. They studied the routine seriously, and Daguyu was pleased to find how quickly they learned. It saved him a lot of work. The days passed quickly. One morning, Daguyu woke to find Guanxi and his sister already up and preparing breakfast. They worked with a clear division of labor, and soon a sumptuous meal was on the table. Daguyu handed them his account information and told them to order whatever supplies they needed online. They were visibly moved by his unconditional trust. After breakfast, the siblings set about helping with the farm at their own pace. With his time suddenly freer, Daguyu felt a little restless and decided to sit and meditate in the living room. He practiced every day. Even small, steady progress was enough. After all, he didn't want to become a human Pokémon. Later, he went into the kitchen and put together plenty of snacks and some hearty packed lunches, then filled several large jugs with juice and lots of ice. I called Bulbasaur to help and carried it over to the construction site. From a short distance, I could see a little girl with a ponytail working with a Vulpix. Her face was serious and her eyes focused on the Pokemon's movements. Dagu didn't want to interrupt. He put the supplies into the shed at the site and then called everyone over for a bite to eat. Carter took off his helmet, grabbed a glass of juice and gulped it down. "Great," he said, then poured another glass and handed it to the little girl. He gave her a gentle tug to bring her closer. She hesitated for a moment. "Mr. Daguyu, this is my daughter. Why don't you say hello?" Carter patted the top of her head with a fond smile. The girl rolled her eyes at him but still spoke politely. "Hello, Mr. Daguyu. My name is Xiaohui, and this little one is Liwei." "Woo," Liwei chimed in, copying Xiaohui's tone as he waved. "Hello, Mr. Daguyu." Daguyu smiled and reached out to ruffle Liwei's hair. The boy squinted his eyes in delight. Xiaohui looked a little surprised. Vulpix was usually so shy that not even her own father could touch it at home, yet it had been calm around Mr. Daguyu, so much so that she hadn't minded him being nearby. For the first time since they'd met, Vulpix was completely unguarded around Mr. Otani. It was clear the little fox trusted him. He seemed like a very good man. Daguyu, Mr. Otani, passed around snacks and poffins to Liwei and Xiaohui. Liwei took a bite and couldn't stop. After finishing, her fur looked noticeably smoother. Seeing that, Xiaohui gave her poffin to Liwei as well. "Haha, I made plenty. Help yourselves," Daguyu said, taking a few more and putting them on Liwei's plate. Liwei squealed with delight, thanked him, and happily kept eating. "I heard from your father that you want to become a Pokemon coordinator, right?" Daguyu asked. "Yes, Mr. Otani," Xiaohui nodded. "Poffins really help boost a Pokemon's appeal. I'll give them to you for free. Don't be quick to refuse. Mr. Carter and I are friends, so I'm happy to help. You'll see the poffins I make are much better than the ones sold in the market." Xiaohui hesitated for a moment, then accepted shyly. "Oh, I'm so sorry to trouble you, Mr. Otani." Carter gave an awkward laugh. He'd brought his daughter here for this very reason, but Otani understood immediately and didn't call him out. Instead, he let it slide and helped them along. Daguyu returned from the construction site to find the Aiguanshi brother and sister busy cleaning and straightening the room. Seeing them at work, he went over and pitched in. They kept at it until evening, and when they finally finished, the housekeeper's sister had a simple dinner ready for everyone. Daguyu tasted the food and found it about 70% as good as what he would have made himself. Still, he had to admit the two kids were impressive, quick learners and naturally talented in the kitchen. After dinner, the Aiguanshi siblings cleared the table in no time. Daguyu made a pot of tea and invited them to sit with him. Bulbasaur and the others didn't care for tea. Usually Daguyu drank it alone or with old man Fumin, but Aiguanshi brother brightened at the offer and happily accepted a cup. His sister tried one glass and then stopped. Daguyu caught her look, smiled, and poured her a glass of juice instead. Her face lit up and she drank it down with a pleased smile. After finishing her juice, the little sister couldn't sit still. She started fiddling with the room's decorations. Daguyu and the older brother sat together and sipped their tea slowly, like two old men reminiscing. When they were done, Daguyu went to the living room computer to study, and his brother drifted over to join him. The sister lost interest after only a few glances. Noticing the child's curiosity, Daguyu picked up Aiguanshi and they watched the screen together. Aiguanshi was a bit restless at first, but when Daguyu stroked his head, he visibly relaxed. Calmed by Daguyu's gentle manner, the boy settled in, and side by side, they dove into the sea of knowledge. That night, lying in bed, Daguyu realized it had been a long time since anyone had challenged him. He decided he'd raise the level of challenges tomorrow. With that thought still on his mind, he fell asleep.